In this video, you will see how an ordinary guy accidentally enters another world and opens a cafe where charming beastmen work. But behind fluffy smiles there are secrets, jealousy and magic that can turn everything around. With each new guest, his life becomes more complicated, and one wrong decision can cost him everything. Watch to the end. The ending of this story is exactly not what you expect. Taichi Anima sighed in exasperation, realizing he was running late again and would have to catch the last train, even though he'd vowed to leave work on time. Then one of his colleagues jokingly suggested he stop by a cat cafe on the way home to take his mind off things a bit. This 28-year-old office worker was already feeling the weight of an approaching midlife crisis. Constant overtime was wearing him down, and only once a month was he able to leave at the appointed time. More and more often, he found himself thinking that his life had become a cycle of fatigue and sleep deprivation. Later, deciding to relieve stress, the guy went into a cozy cafe where cats lazily wandered around. With a sad smile, he apologized to the furry regulars for his long absence and, calling them by name, jokingly called himself a worthless person who just couldn't get his life together. As the evening drew to a close, the man realized he had to hurry to the station or he'd be late. He decided to take a shortcut through the park. Glancing at his watch, the last train was less than 10 minutes away. Halfway there, his attention was caught by a graceful cat with white paws, calmly crossing the road in the diffused sunlight. He couldn't help but smile, noticing how graceful even a stray animal could be. But the next second, a car came flying around the corner. Yuta, without thinking, rushed forward, trying to shield the cat from the impact, and someone's desperate cry rang in his ears, "Careful!" When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a traditional Japanese room with a kotatsu. Everything around him seemed strange and calm, but this was definitely not a hospital ward. So where was he? Suddenly, a soft meowing sound was heard nearby. He sighed with relief, noticing that the cat was alive, but then the animal spread its snow-white wings and, with a shining halo, spoke in a human voice, thanking him for saving him. Yuta looked around in confusion, not understanding what was happening. Having regained his composure a bit, he asked if the creature was a deity. The feathered companion nodded solemnly, introducing himself as a cat god, and Yuta thanked him for at least saving the cat, even though he himself had died. The young man then asked if he really had died, and the winged cat confirmed it, explaining that all the other cats were happy thanks to his treats. The boy readily admitted that he adored these creatures and would spare nothing for them. At that moment, the creature who called itself Noel announced with slight sadness that it was impossible to return him to Earth, but that his soul could be sent to another world. The divine-looking cat nodded affirmatively, as if agreeing with this decision. Yuta, sitting at a low table, admitted he wasn't confident in his physical fitness and was unlikely to survive anywhere else, but expressed a desire to give the cat the strength to live in the new world. His words sounded sincere and decisive. Then the boy, carefully holding the cat in his arms, agreed to the move. Noel, dressed in a mage's robe, asked if he wanted to become an adventurer and master magic, which made Yuta consider it. After a brief pause, he said he didn't want to work in a place where he'd have to fight, and would prefer to do something he truly enjoyed. The small winged creature on his knees nodded in agreement, as if approving of his choice. Yuta then enthusiastically declared his dream of opening a cat cafe in another world. The divine cat looked at him with a slight grin, understanding the depth of his affection for these creatures. Then the winged cat explained that he could only grant abilities and objects, but not living creatures. He offered to become a tamer, and the boy considered it, realizing how tempting the idea sounded. He was soon told that tamers were capable of taming animals, including furry cat-like monsters.
I would be very happy if you subscribed to the channel, liked and wrote a comment, rating this manga on a scale from 1 to 10. Your opinion is very important to me. This will help me better understand what my audience is interested in, because you are really important to me.
Yuta was intrigued, imagining being surrounded by soft creatures, like a living paradise. Then the winged god smiled and handed him the entire tamer's skill set in a small bag, saying it contained what would help him in the new world. A faint light enveloped the object when the boy touched it. Yuta noticed it was a magical bag that froze time and could hold food, money, and other necessary items. The winged creature listened attentively as he discussed its convenience. Afterwards, the boy glanced at the cat hovering nearby as she explained how to browse the contents. He wondered what foods awaited him in the new world, examining the dried meat, black bread, and water in the bag, the first symbols of the life to come. The winged cat calmly explained that the tastes of food in the New World were little different from those familiar, although there were significantly fewer monster varieties, and some creatures were even used as ingredients. The boy then wondered if he could get used to such a reality. The young man gratefully accepted the cat's promise to share his special abilities. He felt relieved the deity he had saved was now safe, and the shining creature thanked him for his kindness. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a man in a business suit lay face down on the soft grass. Not far away, another observer, noticing a strange movement in the depths of the forest, became wary and turned around, disbelieving his eyes. Gradually, his memory returned. He recalled his encounter with the divine cat and realized he was now in a fantasy world where magic truly existed. He then determinedly decided to explore the surrounding area to figure out where he had ended up. Slightly embarrassed, the boy admitted to himself that he needed to test his abilities. He touched the glowing symbol, activating the magical status screen, and prepared to see the results. A vast array of skills and stats appeared on the panel, each with the name of Taichi Anima, the one dubbed everyone's favorite furry friend. All levels were infinite, and the class abilities evoked awe. The man frowned at the numbers, not understanding why they had reached their maximum. At that moment, a huge dragon appeared among the trees, its scales glistening in the sun. There was a cracking sound in the branches, and it turned around abruptly. A loud roar made the earth tremble. Frightened, the man realized he had to run before the monster got any closer. But as soon as he took a step, the dragon, its jaws open, rushed straight at him. Panicked, he wondered if it was even possible to tame such a creature. After all, dragons were considered monsters, and even if they succeeded, what would they do next? Meanwhile, the gigantic creature approached, compressing space with every breath. Moments later, he encountered a new adversary, a two-headed beast, one head belonging to a dragon and the other to a wolf. The wolf's mouth lashed out with a snarl, causing the man to recoil in horror. Then he instinctively shouted a taming spell, attempting to subdue the wolf. Magical symbols flared in the air as the beast leaped forward, the shadow of a dragon and another beast already gathering behind him. Meanwhile, in another memory, Arima managed to finish his shift on time. The girl at the counter greeted him warmly, holding a cat in her arms, and asked with a smile if he'd like to work part-time in the evening. He agreed without hesitation. Later, the young man knelt down, holding a feather toy, which a cat named Macaron delightedly caught. This game gradually melted away the fatigue of the previous day. Yuta took a picture of Macaron with a satisfied smile, trying to get the perfect angle. The other cats gathered around, as if sensing a treat was about to fall into their laps. He playfully asked who wanted one, and everyone's tails went up in the air. Then, looking back, he realized that this was exactly what he'd dreamed of, being a cat tamer in a new world and opening a quiet, fluffy cafe. The thought of having so many cats by his side again brought him genuine joy. He soon found himself face to face with a huge silver dog, nearly 2 meters long. Yuta awkwardly explained that he'd accidentally used his taming skill on it, though the beast, growling, didn't look pleased. The guy admitted with a guilty look that he had done it impulsively, without thinking about the consequences, and was now tormented by doubts that it would all turn into a disaster. Then he remembered his dialogue ability, which allowed him to understand animals. The enormous beast before him pricked up its ears in surprise and said it couldn't believe a mere human had managed to tame it. The lone Fenrir grumbled irritably at being forced to obey its tamer. Yuta sheepishly apologized, adding that he had simply defeated a tasty-looking dragon, which evoked a mixture of envy and resentment in the beast. After this, the young man considered whether to continue, but, noticing the Fenrir's tail wagging happily, he smiled. Perhaps this is how their new partnership begins: kindness, a little magic, and an endless love for furry creatures. The young man bowed gratefully to the divine cat, acknowledging that fate had brought them together for a reason. After a brief pause, he asked, a little sheepishly, if he would consider becoming his familiar, now that they had established a connection. The huge wolf smirked and remarked that the man before him looked too weak to be called a warrior. The boy, trying to hide his awkwardness, nodded and playfully agreed to become the wolf's familiar, prompting a loud chuckle from the beast. A man named Taichi Anima introduced himself, trying to sound confident. The wolf invited him to stay by his side, explaining that a man alone would quickly become prey to other monsters, as these forests were full of predators. The beast then asked him for a name, explaining that monsters in this world are usually nameless, and it is the tamers who give them names, thereby acknowledging their existence and the connection between them. The young tamer admitted that this was his first familiar and he was only a novice. He thanked the wolf for the instruction and then, with a smile, asked him to hurry up and identify himself, as if he were not a fearsome creature but an old friend. Reflecting, the boy decided he couldn't give a simple name to such a noble and furry creature. After a brief hesitation, he uttered a name that sounded soft and proud, Luke, meaning light. The man quietly explained that Luca's name was associated with light, adding that the wolf's shining fur perfectly reflected this meaning. When the beast twitched its ear and slightly squinted, the boy involuntarily blushed at the unexpected cuteness. The young man then asked Luca to look after him on their new journey. The wolf nodded his head in satisfaction, boasting that the name perfectly suited a Fenrir of his stature, and that he would take the man under his wing. The man in the suit, looking at his new companion, couldn't believe how soft he was. Although he'd petted countless cats, this furry beast felt the most comfortable and alive of them all. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers southeast of the city of Larim in the kingdom of Shulkuk, deep in the forest, magical barriers stood. Several mages maintained them to prevent powerful monsters from breaking through. However, as the narrative explained, not every monster can be contained by magic. When defenses fail, high-ranking adventurers step in to stop the escape and restore order to the area. At that moment, a majestic Fenrir stood among the dense trees, calmly observing the morning light. The day was unusually sunny, and the beast idly thought it would be nice to take a swim. Various animals gathered in a forest clearing near the water: a deer, a rabbit, a fox, and several small spirits. They watched the glistening surface of the lake until two of the smaller creatures jumped in delight, noticing movement. A moment later, there was a splash. A lone wolf entered the water and, with a satisfied expression, called himself a Fenrir warrior. He sensed that today would be special. When the wolf came ashore, he shook himself, scattering drops of water, and thought with smug confidence that he looked especially impressive today. Some time later, his stomach growled. Fenrir decided it was time to find something tasty, preferably a dragon, remembering the times when prey was much more plentiful. He then gracefully climbed a tree to survey the surroundings, chuckling as he recalled rumors that humans could cook incredibly delicious food. Though he considered it foolish, the thought nevertheless caught his attention. Suddenly, the massive figure of a dragon flashed through the foliage. The wolf approached cautiously, and from the other side of the forest, a man in a suit appeared, frozen in surprise as he saw the beast and the monster preparing to clash. The man attempted to use his taming skill, channeling magical energy into the enormous wolf. It narrowed its eyes in disbelief, suspecting the man had wandered here for some purpose, and tension hung in the air. The man sensed that this was not just a beast, but a being with a powerful aura and intelligence. He thought that he couldn't leave such a thing alone, while the wolf-like creature wondered in response whether this strange mortal had truly managed to tame it. The young man acknowledged with slight excitement that the wolf possessed incredible skill and strength. In response, the wolf, a little sheepishly, admitted that he wouldn't mind becoming his familiar, and for the first time, a feeling of mutual respect and trust arose between them. The man awkwardly apologized when the majestic Fenrir irritably remarked on how humiliating it was for a solitary warrior to submit to a tamer. An embarrassed silence fell between them, but deep down, the beast no longer felt the same hostility. Then the man admitted he was grateful to the wolf, at least for not running away. He noted how often it wagged its tail, and the Fenrir became thoughtful. After all, tamed creatures are given names, unlike those nameless monsters that forever flee from danger. After a brief pause, the boy offered the legendary Fenrir warrior the chance to become his familiar. He calmly replied that the man should give him a name, as without one, the union would be incomplete. Noel, who had settled down next to her, squinted contentedly at the touch and pondered his new name, Luke. He blushed slightly and, looking away, asked how much longer they would pet him. The man quickly apologized, and the noble Fenrir proudly declared that earning his trust wasn't easy. He then asked Luke if he knew the way to the city, and received a confident answer. As they walked, the man was about to confess that he had come from another world. He was tormented by the question of whether the wolf would believe him or consider him mad. With a doubtful look in his eyes, he began to explain his situation. Then the fox-like beast explained that these lands were rarely visited by humans, and that to enter, one had to cross a magical barrier. Hearing this, the man realized that this was definitely not a creature from the human world. He realized he was in a dangerous place, where any mistake could cost him his life. He noted with alarm that he was dressed too lightly and decided to reach the nearest town as quickly as possible. The boy asked Luke if he could accompany him despite his size. Then the wolf suddenly changed shape, shrinking to the size of a large dog. The surprised man happily agreed to go with him. He soon offered the white wolf the chance to eat first, mentioning that he hadn't yet tasted a dead dragon himself. Luke wasted no time in tackling the raw meat, and the man watched in amazement as the beast devoured it with relish. Then the man remembered his cooking skill and decided to try it out. He summoned a piece of dragon meat, and a mystical fox appeared nearby, watching the process closely. The girl with short dark hair was surprised when she tasted the prepared dish, admiring its flavor. Meanwhile, the tamer thoughtfully pondered how to use rare ingredients like magical herbs in dragon meat. The young man, carefully studying the plants, explained to his companion that the combination of the magical herb with dragon meat would create not just food, but a real steak, imbued with the strength of a monster. He enthusiastically demonstrated his cooking skills, and soon a perfectly cooked steak shone before them. The man proudly explained that with the right ingredients, even monster-sized dishes could be prepared. He brought the food to Luke, who immediately dug into it, biting greedily. The man laughed and asked if the meat smelled strange, but the wolf merely purred contentedly and continued eating. A little later, the man remarked that the dragon meat, skillfully prepared, was dozens of times tastier than raw. Fenrir happily confirmed this, acknowledging that such a dinner was simply perfect for a warrior. After the meal, the tamer suggested making another steak soon and using the remaining materials, the dragon's skin and claws. The wolf listened with interest, and the human wondered if he could sell the surplus. Luke then expressed gratitude, surprised that he was being offered a share of the proceeds. He inquired if there were any buyers in town, and the owner assured him that everything would sell quickly there. Filled with hope, the man realized his dream of owning his own fluffy cafe might come true sooner than he expected. He adjusted his bag, glanced at the road ahead, and headed with Luke toward the city, where the next chapter of their adventure would begin. Luke warned his companion to hold on tight or risk getting into trouble, and the boy enthusiastically agreed, climbing onto the back of the enormous wolf. The wind whistled in his ears as they raced through the dense forest, leaving behind clouds of dust and claw marks on the soft ground. A couple of hours earlier, a man, making his way through the trees, asked his furry companion how long it would take to get to the city. The wolf-like creature calmly replied that the journey would take several hours at a human pace. Then the man, walking beside Luke, noted to himself that humans were indeed prone to moving too slowly. He sighed, realizing that the journey to the city on foot would take a good part of a day, unless he used magic or riding. He soon decided to mount the enormous beast. But as soon as Luke set off, the boy flinched from the unexpected acceleration. The wolf moved smoothly, but with the force of a predator. Fenrir himself thought that such behavior was quite natural for the monster. After some time, the young man noticed a large bird of prey in the sky, its wings spread menacingly. He clenched his fists and declared that he could defeat it, now that he had a familiar. After a brief fight, the boy examined the captured bird and decided it could be sold profitably. He carefully placed the catch in his magic bag, careful not to let the blood stain other items. Several hours later, the man and his wolf stood on a hill overlooking a vast city surrounded by stone walls. He marveled at its size, and Luke explained that this was Lurn, the second largest city in the kingdom of Shulwuk. As they approached, they noticed the bustling streets, adventurers, soldiers, and merchants filled the air with sounds and conversation. The man noted the town's advantageous location on a hill where monsters rarely appeared, and farmers toiled quietly near the castle walls. As they passed through the archway at the main gate, the companions discussed where they could relax and how to attract the first customers for the future fluffy cafe. Meanwhile, the wolf lazily muttered that the owner still looked weak. One of the knights cautiously held the beast while the man assured him it was harmless. Curious townspeople gathered under the stone vault, watching the scene with interest and slight alarm. Approaching the post, the man explained to the guard that he had tamed the creature. The guard nodded but demanded to see identification. The man tensed, remembering that his Japanese documents would hardly be acceptable in this world. The guard warned that entry without a pass would cost 5,000 celli. The man quickly checked his wallet and found only 3 silver coins, unsure if they would be enough to pay. He nervously asked the guard how much the coins were worth, then confessed to Luke that he only knew they were money, but didn't understand their true value. The wolf snorted condescendingly, watching the man lose himself in his calculations. The man then decided to estimate the amount based on the soldiers' reactions. One of the knights offered to exchange large silver coins, and the traveler agreed to pay exactly if the exchange was successful. Having received his change, he politely thanked the guard, who returned the bag containing 5,000 shell. Luke examined the shiny coins carefully, reflecting on how quickly people transform metal into meaning. Before leaving, the traveler asked the soldier if he knew of an inexpensive place to stay. He paused, then named several inns, mentioning that one of them was famous for its good breakfasts. The young man thanked the elderly knight for the direction to the Crescent Inn. He decided to check it out, pleased to find the prices reasonable and the food rumored to be delicious. Arriving at his destination, he breathed a sigh of relief. Thanking everyone for waiting, the man realized it was time to explore the surroundings so he could soon begin preparing to open his fluffy cafe. Walking through the city, he admired the architecture, while passers-by's gazes were drawn to the white wolf next to him. Luke smugly thought that everyone was admiring his magnificence, while a woman nearby remarked that he was an incorrigible optimist. Then one of the merchants advised Tai Chi to first acquire suitable equipment. Looking around at the display cases of clothing and armor, the man remembered that he really could do with some new gear before getting down to business. The man reached the Crescent Inn, bundled up against the cold wind and quietly lamenting that he wished he had a warm jacket. Luke walked beside him, smiling as he remarked that humans were overly fragile creatures, too dependent on the weather. The innkeeper shrugged, explaining that he couldn't accommodate such a large familiar under the same roof as the guests. The traveler reluctantly agreed and, thanking him, headed for the exit, wondering where to find a place to stay for the night. Outside, he mused that he hadn't expected even a wolf couldn't find a place to rest. After a brief pause, he decided to try his luck at the Adventurers Guild, where he might find work and shelter. Then Luke pointed his paw at a wooden sign nearby. It read Beast Tamers Guild. He was delighted, thinking they'd surely be able to give him some advice on how to handle a large familiar. He cautiously entered the building, which at first glance appeared empty. Taking a step forward, he quietly called out to see if anyone was inside. A friendly female voice responded from the depths of the room, inviting him in. The short-haired girl introduced herself as Shelty, the local secretary. The man explained that his companion's name was Luke and that he was a Fenrir, prompting the girl to ask with keen interest if he was the Wolf King. She laughed, finding it funny, and the visitor raised his eyebrows in surprise when he heard that Fenrir had not been seen for hundreds of years and were now considered creatures of legend. The man admitted he'd come from far away and had no identification. The woman then suggested registering with the Tamers Guild. This document would be considered official identification. He happily agreed. He was given a form asking for his name, age, and familiar, Luke, designated as the Wolf King. The wolf himself protested, claiming he had just been given this title without his consent. The young man laughed and said that such creatures were truly legendary now. Fenrir snorted proudly, demanding that he not be lumped in with the ordinary dogs known as strays. The boy silently noted that his companion was acting like a true tsundere, despite his beaming pride. Luke, drawing himself up, declared that being a lone Fenrir was a legend in itself. Shelty explained that the skills section doesn't need to be filled out, many prefer to keep their abilities private. Instead, she suggested listing any special requirements at the bottom of the form to make the job search easier. The man, examining the document, pondered his skills, admitting to himself that some of them looked like actual cheats. At the bottom of the page was a warning: some of the quests required familiars to fight monsters. The girl happily noted that it was rare for tamers to possess healing skills. The man decided that this would be the foundation of his plan, opening a cozy fluffy cafe offering treatment and relaxation. He excitedly told Shelty about his idea to create a special cafe where visitors could interact with the cute, furry creatures. He admitted that he disliked fighting and wanted to bring peace, not fear, to people. The girl frowned, not understanding the meaning of the word fluffy. The boy, a little nervously, thought that in this world, they didn't yet know the concept of wetness or the joy of fluffy comfort. He then resolutely declared that he would still promote the idea of Fluffy Cafe and make it popular. At this point, Shelty apologized for the delay and handed him a completed membership card. The girl explained that the card served as identification in other guilds of the same level. She then asked him to infuse it with some magic, promising to show him an interesting function. The man was surprised, noting that it resembled activating a skill. When he did as instructed, lines of text appeared on the map. Shelty showed him the document and explained that this information only appeared through the use of magic, after which she advised him not to reveal any unnecessary information to anyone. As they parted, he asked why such a feature was necessary, and the girl explained, it allows for the assessment of a person's trustworthiness when making recommendations and even reveals whether someone has been involved in crimes. The man thanked her, deciding that everything in the new world was much smarter than he had expected. The man calmly explained to his companion that no guild required them to disclose personal information and suggested they take a look at the quest board. Passing by the notices, the woman thoughtfully asked if all the tamers there truly only cared for animals and didn't engage in combat. Then Yuta admitted he couldn't fight and dreamed of opening a cafe where people could simply relax. Lucia ruefully asked if he'd be willing to take on at least simple combat missions, but he firmly replied that it was impossible. Afterwards, Yuta approached Shelty and asked if there was a place nearby where he and Luke could stay, as the inn had turned them down. Shelty smiled and remarked that Luke was indeed too big for a regular place to stay. Approaching the reception desk, the man inquired about the price and learned that the guild was offering rooms at a reduced rate of 2,000 shell per night. After doing the math, he decided to stay for 5 days to avoid spending all his money at once. On his way to the room, he was accompanied by a smiling girl, and a huge wolf strode beside him. She offered to show him the way, but Luke mockingly declared that he wouldn't play with a ball like some house dog. A friendly staff member explained that guild members were free to use the courtyard. She added that she was always ready to help with any questions and wished them a pleasant stay. Then Yuta asked how many tamers there were. The girl sighed and replied that there had been fewer of them lately, but added with a smile that those who remained were unusual and fascinating in their own way. At that moment, the hooded bearer standing nearby interjected. He explained that fighting monsters requires the ability to cover one's partner's weaknesses, and taming powerful creatures is an art, making the tamer's profession one of the most difficult. Later, Yuta asked the girl to stay with them longer, if possible. She happily agreed, delighted that Taichi-san had decided to join their circle, and her partner, standing nearby, confirmed that this was excellent news. The man then asked if it was possible to sell the materials obtained from the monsters. He remembered and explained that the Adventurers Guild handled such transactions, while the crafting associations only bought specialized raw materials. The girl announced that she was heading there and urged caution. The scene shifted to a crowded hall. The man, looking out at the noisy crowd, noted how crowded it was and reluctantly joined the line. The woman at the counter greeted him politely and asked him to lay out the items for appraisal. The man explained that some of the items were too large, so they were stored in a magical bag. One of the workers spotted a rare item among the loot and invited him to go deeper. In the workshop, the blacksmith pointed to a wide table and offered to lay the items out there, and Yuta agreed to start with the dragon remains. When he opened the bag, 2 aproned craftsmen froze in amazement at the sight of a pile of defeated monsters. The man himself calmly noted that they had dealt with many opponents on the way to the city, and it was a good thing he hadn't brought them all. He sheepishly admitted he was only an F-rank tamer. The two masters exchanged glances, discussing how such powerful monsters could fall in a single blow. Yuta explained that it was all thanks to his familiar. One of the masters inquired about the furry creature standing nearby. Taichi smiled and said it was the Wolf King, asking not to compare him to ordinary dogs. Luke frowned slightly, but allowed his master to stroke his neck. The worker in the bandana perked up and announced it was time for butchering. The man thanked him, and another assistant promised to quickly estimate the price, admiring how calmly the royal beast was behaving. After some time, the woman brought the results, apologizing for the delay. The volume was too large and required a separate room. The man responded calmly, assuring her he was in no hurry. After adding it all up, he came up with a total of 3,430,000 people, including the platinum golem, the red wolves, and the wild feathered beast. The amount stunned him, but it brought him a sense of satisfaction. Inspired, he shared his plan to open a fluffy cafe, where furry creatures would bring joy to people. The woman asked curiously whether he planned to use part of the proceeds for equipment or something special for the establishment. Eliza thoughtfully considered the idea of opening a cafe, imagining what it might look like. Then her interlocutor assured her that the presence of a powerful tamer in the city inspires trust and peace of mind, adding that she should check with the merchant guild for further steps. The woman said with a smile that she would definitely visit Cafe Fluffy when it opened. The man promised to let her know in advance, and soon another employee greeted Taichi, asking if he'd sold the materials, to which he nodded confidently. Overjoyed, he told the girl that he now had sufficient funds to open an establishment and planned to visit the merchant guild tomorrow to find suitable premises. She delightedly admitted that she hadn't expected such quick results. From a conversation with the girl, Yuta learned that the Tamers Guild owned several buildings on the outskirts of the city, as some familiars were too large for normal spaces. This news piqued his interest and a desire to see them for himself. Later, the man promised the woman he'd prepare several options for examination, for which she thanked him with a smile. Tired, he lay down next to the sleeping Luke and, staring at the ceiling, reflected on how far he'd come in the last few days and what needed to be done tomorrow. The next morning, entering the shop, he was surprised when the clerk allowed him to bring the enormous wolf inside. Yuta offered to leave the familiar outside, but the owner merely waved his hand and thanked him for his politeness, adding that it didn't bother him. After examining the armor on display, the man noted its quality but felt it was too heavy. On Luke's advice, he chose simple, soft clothing, more comfortable than his previous lightweight garments. He explained to the merchant that the wolf nearby wasn't just any animal, but his trusted partner. The merchant, amazed by the animal's size, nodded approvingly, and Yuta asked Luke to show a little compassion. After all, they were now working together. While they discussed their purchases, the two admired the thick fur of the rare wolf-like creature. One of the men expressed interest in the idea of opening a cafe where people could interact with the furry monsters and offered to help if needed. A cheerful girl greeted them outside and greeted Taichi and his enormous companion. He explained that he was looking for a spacious yet cozy space where he could set up a cafe and live comfortably. Yuta asked if they'd found any suitable options. Lucia confirmed there was a house near the Tamers Guild, but Yuta suggested considering a plot near the outer wall, where it would be quieter and more peaceful. Picking up the property map, he perked up as he looked at the building with its garden and spacious backyard, which contained a well, an excellent place, in his opinion, for training familiars. Discussing the potential dangers beyond the city walls, they decided that training there might even be beneficial. Then Yuta asked to see the house in person, and Lucia readily agreed. When they arrived, the boy gazed in admiration at the building, covered in green vines. The courtyard was silent, and nearby, in the shade of the trees, a majestic fox with a bushy tail stood calmly. The girl cheerfully offered to show him around, and Taichi nodded with a smile. Meanwhile, outside, the fox, settling down on the grass, idly thought that the place looked quite decent. Looking around the rooms, Yuta admired the cozy atmosphere. Lucia explained that this used to be a restaurant, the owner of which was a tamer and used familiars to gather ingredients. Luke, however, grumbled discontentedly that the space was too small. The wolf stated with dignity that such a dwelling was far too modest for a being of his rank. Yuta then chuckled and replied that the house wasn't beautiful for its luxury, but for the way it was lived in, promising that Luke would soon come to love the place. Fenrir merely snorted, turning away with a tsundere expression. The girl showed the second floor, noting that it housed living quarters and that the rent was 10,000 shield per month. Taichi noted that the house was spacious but needed some renovation. He asked Lucia to handle the rent and paperwork, which she happily agreed to. Yuta then suggested they return to the guild to complete the formalities, and she eagerly agreed. As they left the house, the young trainer felt a surge of confidence. He realized he had taken another step toward realizing his dream of creating Fluffy's Cafe, though much work and preparation lay ahead. At the Harem Adventurers Guild, the secretary was, as usual, listening to strange stories from travelers. Suddenly, Amelia burst into the room, hastily apologizing for the intrusion and asking the guildmaster for a moment for an urgent conversation. Then Eliza angrily called out to her boss, not finding her there, and was indignant at where such an important figure could have disappeared to, since we were talking about a high-level tamer, capable of subjugating the Wolf King himself. One of the girls asked in surprise if such a powerful man was really in town, and her partner noted that he hadn't even shown up at the guild. She then admitted that she herself was poor at negotiating and was completely unsuited to the role of leader. Meanwhile, Noel stood by the window, calmly declaring that administrative work wasn't for him. Eliza wondered why a man of such talent and status would voluntarily turn down a prestigious position when he could have had a profound impact. Then the third participant in the discussion noted that it was particularly interesting that his familiar was the Wolf King, and suggested inviting him to collaborate with the Adventurers Guild. However, the woman replied with a smirk that the conversation was over, she simply didn't want to drag him into it. After a brief pause, Eliza remarked that the presence of such a tamer in the city inspired confidence. Her companion, on the contrary, feared that if he was questioned too much, he might leave the city. The third added that such persistence could indeed ruin everything. Someone present acknowledged that the Wolf King they had defeated had been a formidable opponent and wondered if he had been tamed by another tamer. The others praised their successful work and began to disperse, discussing their next assignments. Left alone, Eliza reflected on how calm he remained despite all the noise around him. She wondered if she'd ever meet this man again in the city, and, smiling, promised herself she'd get to know him not only as a guildmaster but also as a fellow adventurer. Meanwhile, Luke joyfully celebrated their success, amazed at how quickly his dream of opening his own cafe had come true. He thanked the wolf for his help, but the wolf snorted, displeased by the excessive familiarity and the fact that he was being petted without permission. Yuta laughed and asked if she was going to buy everything she needed, suggesting they unpack the household items first. She blushed and told him to stop sniffing her, calling him a real tsundere, which elicited a quiet grumble from Luke. The wolf expressed interest in his unusual ability, and the boy enthusiastically revealed his rare skill of creation, which allows him to create objects directly from his imagination. He admitted he'd long wanted to try it out. Yuta closed his eyes, concentrated, and began to mentally form an object. Soon, the image of a three-dimensional round table with carved cat paw-shaped legs appeared in the air, perfect for the center of the future cafe. When the shining structure materialized, he couldn't contain his delight. A woman watching nearby suggested a soft wooden base and a natural shade to give it a cozy look. After a quick tweak, they decided the result was perfect. One of the guests praised his unusual abilities, and Luke, having settled comfortably, asked him how he liked the soft cushion chair he had created. The wolf yawned lazily and admitted that it was indeed possible to rest on it with dignity. The boy watched with affection as one of the little furry creatures curled up on the new sofa, finding some peace in it. Meanwhile, the others discussed the installation of small tables, pillows, and shelving. Yuta explained that the cafe's backstage area would have a seating area, hidden from guests. Toys, balls, and cat toys were already there, though the cats themselves weren't there yet. He then proudly showed off a huge cat tower that snaked around the wall and a spiral staircase for the furry creatures that led straight to the first table, as if to the center of their cozy world. When the decorations were complete, the boy noted that all that remained was to hang the lace curtains. He glanced out the window and realized the sun had already set, time had flown by. Then he suggested they go home so as not to worry Shelty, and Luke reluctantly agreed. They left the building, enjoying the evening air and the feeling of accomplishment. On the way, Yuta, smiling, said he was glad the dog liked it here and jokingly forgave him for his recent tantrums. Later, lying on the floor of the new house, the wolf remarked that the space was a little cramped, but perfectly suitable for a creature of his magnitude. Yuta, standing at the entrance to his new establishment, suddenly realized the facade was missing the most important thing, a sign. He frowned, realizing the omission, and, turning to his companions, asked if everything was alright, as if seeking an excuse for his forgetfulness. Inside Fluffy's cafe, a young man explained that the word creation holds special meaning for his business. Luke listened intently as the owner described his relaxed work schedule and plans to add a doorbell to greet customers with a melodic chime. The wolf then remarked that opening any establishment required a permit and suggested they go to the merchant guild. Afterward, he stretched lazily and declared that he would remain dozing on the soft chair while the owner took care of the formalities. Taichi Arima came to the guild and approached the woman behind the counter, asking permission to open a cafe where people could interact with familiars. The woman smiled warmly and assured him she would be happy to help with the business registration. At that moment, Noel asked with genuine interest why no one understood the meaning of the word mafu. Yuta, slightly embarrassed, explained that it meant softness and comfort. After all, even monsters can be fluffy and soothing. The girl laughed, finding the idea unusual but charming. She admitted that the concept of Fluffy's cafe sounded tempting. Yuta assured her that, as a tamer, he had every right to such an activity, explaining that familiars often assist people in their work. He also added that any creatures working alongside humans should be registered with the guild, a point she wholeheartedly agreed with. The man behind the counter clarified that shops and cafes on the outskirts of town were required to pay a 5% tax on their sales. Yuta, hearing this, merely nodded approvingly, calling the rate quite lenient by the kingdom's standards. Soon, one of the assistants inquired about the opening time. However, the waitress explained that some more preparation was needed. At that moment, Yuta jumped up, turning suddenly pale, and exclaimed that they had a huge problem, then rushed for the exit. Reaching home, he breathlessly apologized to the sleepy Fenrir for disturbing his peace. The wolf raised its head, looking at him with concern, and calmly asked what had happened this time. Yuta, waving his arms, explained that he needed enough fluffies to open a cafe. Luke snorted and suggested taming a few new creatures. A girl intervened, asking where he could find friendly fluffy monsters. They discussed how rookie adventurers typically hunted berry rabbits, which inhabited the meadows to the southwest. Some doubted they were tame enough, but Luke noted that some were quite friendly. Thanking her for the tip, Yuta declared he would head there immediately. He offered to catch the nimble berry rabbits himself, but she politely declined, wishing him luck and advising him to be careful. Reaching the meadow, the boy was surprised to see a tiny, fluffy creature with strawberries on its head. He realized it was the very same berry bunny, and, sitting down, he couldn't contain his delight at its cuteness. The man noticed that the animal approached them too calmly, which seemed odd. Luke, watching from the side, noted that these creatures are usually wary. However, the rabbit jumped up cheerfully, as if welcoming its tameness, and snuggled amiably against Yuta's leg. He named the snow-white creature Marshmallow and wondered if he could talk to it using his talk skill. Luke, squinting skeptically, said that such creatures were unlikely to be intelligent enough to speak, but patience sometimes worked wonders. Meanwhile, Yuta joyfully petted Luke, admiring his intelligence and devotion. The wolf grumbled grumpily, looking like a proud beast, but his tail wagged treacherously, betraying his pleasure at the attention. Soon the boy noticed even more strawberry-headed creatures appearing around him. They were jumping joyfully and humming the word taming, as if picking up the melody of the general merriment. Among his new friends, he singled out a brown and a black and white rabbit, naming them Karen and Monica. The little creatures scurried joyfully around his feet, and Luke watched in amazement, wondering how they had managed to multiply so quickly. Yuta, smiling, answered someone's question about his intention to tame even more animals. As he spoke, several furry creatures approached, as if eager to become part of a new family. At the end of the day, he proudly explained to a knight at the city gates that he was a wolf tamer with 1 wolf and 10 berry rabbits under his command. The knight, noticing the tail procession behind him, turned pale and cautiously inquired if they weren't too many for one man. Yuta asked if there would be any problems entering the city if all the creatures were listed as familiars. The knight replied that it all depended on the taming skill level. The higher the skill, the more creatures one could keep without limit. The hooded man asked doubtfully, but the dark-haired boy confidently remarked that taming weak monsters didn't require much effort. He mentally noted that all his skills were listed as level 0, but in reality, they were far more powerful than they appeared. One of the guards inquired about how many creatures could be tamed and how to increase their rank, while the other nodded in agreement. At that moment, the girl with the animal ears called the newcomers to listen to the explanation, surprising the visitor sitting at the table. Later, Yuta happily remarked that the wolf loved the soft beanbag chair. Luke proudly declared it his personal space now, and the little furry creatures swarmed around him in delight, calling his throne the best in the world. The boy watched the cute creatures fondly, then thought about tea, a rare drink in this world. He was determined not to accept the mediocre taste and activated a special skill, hoping to rectify the situation. Enthusiastically, he summoned a list of errands for the cat god, using his unique skill, purchase. Listing powdered sencha and Earl Grey tea bags, Yuta wondered if the request would reach the deity correctly and if he'd mix up the goods. While he waited for a response, the guy suggested putting together a menu. He chopped out the drinks and sweets on the chalkboard, noting that it was only a rough draft, but a decent start. When the reply arrived, Yuta was surprised to find he had to pay 2,800 shell and looked at the coins in his palm in confusion. They suddenly vanished, as if they had vanished into thin air, and he gratefully thanked the cat god for the magical delivery. That evening, one of the girls happily announced she was willing to live right there in the cafe. Yuta agreed with relief, but pointed out that they didn't have a bathroom, as baths were a luxury only available to the wealthy. By the well, the boy was reluctantly washing the huge wolf, complaining that he didn't want to do it. However, he firmly insisted that Luke still needed to freshen up after his long walks. Luke called Mimi over and praised the berry bunnies for their obedience, looking slightly irritated himself. He soon laughed and remarked that newcomers shouldn't be allowed to get too carried away, otherwise they'll get into trouble. Yuta admitted that washing all the animals in winter is difficult, but he dreams of a hot bath. He happily agreed that minor changes to the rented space were acceptable and breathed a sigh of relief, anticipating the comfort. A day later, he showed his pets a new structure called Creation, a separate bathhouse. The wolf and the little creatures watched with interest as their master explained that they would surely like this place. The boy told Luke it was a bathhouse and suggested he try it out. Fenrir eyed the contraption suspiciously, wondering how it even worked, but soon waved his paw, deciding not to bother with the magical details. The dog watched warily as the little creatures dived into the water, indignant that they had dared to do so first. But a moment later, Luke noticed something strange and, jumping up, tried to figure out why the water seemed unusually soft. Fenrir stretched out blissfully in the warm water, surrounded by the jumping creatures. Yuta sighed with relief, noting that cold baths were clearly not for the noble beast, and promised to give him such baths every day. Afterwards, he joined them, enjoying the warmth. Luke splashed around happily nearby, and Yuta laughed, saying that he was clearly enjoying himself more than he was letting on. Having dried the animals, the boy addressed the berry bunnies, choosing Marshmallow as their leader. He assigned them a new task, and they nodded in unison, serious expressions on their faces, demonstrating their readiness. 3 hours later, the Fluffies were resting peacefully under the table, and Yuta, standing behind the counter, reminded them that when guests arrived, they could play with them or just spend time as they wanted. He looked at the empty hall and suddenly realized what it was like to rent his own cafe. Then Luke announced that he had already posted a sign announcing the new establishment, though there was no official opening. Yuta merely nodded, hoping that the first customers would soon find their way to Fluffy's cafe. At the entrance to Cafe Fluffy, a knight greeted two travelers amiably, explaining they'd decided to stop there on their way back to town. Nearby, two women silently watched the conversation, curiously appreciating the new establishment and its unusual atmosphere. Suddenly, one of the girls warned of the presence of berry rabbits and a wolf nearby, and the man, realizing the potential danger, quickly asked everyone to wait. At that very moment, someone shouted to be careful. Attention swept through the room, putting everyone on guard. Then the girl noticed that these weren't wild creatures at all, but her own familiars. The man, noticing the alarm in her eyes, calmly explained that such cases were extremely rare and that monsters usually didn't appear in such places without a reason. Yuta, smiling, introduced Fluffy Cafe as a place to meet cute, furry creatures and invited guests to try it for themselves. Two patrons were surprised to see familiars in the room, but Yuta assured them everything was under control. Afterwards, Taichi introduced himself with a polite smile and explained that the cafe had only just opened that day, and they were its first customers. His voice was filled with pride, mingled with a hint of excitement. Nina introduced herself as a hunter with a warm smile, and her companion, a burly man named Grizz, added that they were a team of 3. The girl behind the counter asked how Nina was doing, and she cheerfully replied that everything was great. At the counter, Yuta explained to the trio that the establishment had a one-drink per person policy. A friendly woman nearby invited them to sit freely and enjoy the company of the furry creatures, creating a cozy atmosphere. When one customer asked about the difference between this drink and regular tea, the barista explained that it was green tea, a common refreshing drink from his home world. His calm tone lent an almost magical quality to the story. The guests placed their orders, one chose iced tea, the other a classic black tea. The barista noted that he should add a note about green tea to the menu. After the hunt, the girls also asked for cookies and chocolate to replenish their energy. Yuta calculated the cost, drinks at 700 celli, sweets at 300, for a total of 2,700. He invited the girls to sit down and promised that everything would be ready in minutes. Mira admitted that she once hunted similar creatures, but now views them differently, finding them charming. Her companion added that if you stop thinking of them as monsters, they simply look like small animals. The girl called out to Mimi, who suddenly jumped, as if hearing a familiar voice. The man watched the scene with mild curiosity and a certain respect for this connection between man and creature. The girl was confused about how to act, her gaze fixed on the cute little animal. The boy noticed that although he looked stern, the rabbit wasn't at all afraid of him and was even reaching out with its paws. The girl with two ponytails laughed and said he was being too emotional, but he replied that such things didn't happen often. Then the other one, wearing a cap, sighed and said she'd had enough tea and rest, adding a question about whether Eris was interested in all this. Yuta soon brought drinks and sweets, apologizing for the wait. The customers looked at the green hue of the drink in surprise and immediately complimented how appetizing the presentation looked. The short-haired girl took a sip, and the one with the ponytails blinked in surprise. The man at their table blew his whistle softly, as if taken aback, causing a slight confusion among the others. Noel quietly expressed doubt about the price, but Yuta calmly assured him everything was correct, remarking on the dessert's flavor. Mira, after tasting the drink, said with a smile that it was smooth, but with a pleasant bitterness. The pigtailed girl sighed, holding the cup, and then suddenly hugged the small, furry creature. She was embarrassed by her own reaction, and the man handed her more treats, which he gratefully accepted. Then the girl, clearing her throat, invited the little animal to lie on her lap, adding that no one was watching. Meanwhile, at the next table, a cheerful group was enjoying drinks, and laughter filled the room with warmth. Yuta, watching the guests, thought how strange it was that many had never seen such creatures. He wondered if perhaps offering them food would calm the furry creatures even more. He chuckled to himself, remembering his past life, where he'd only dined on instant noodles. Yuta wondered if he could use his by skill to order packaged groceries, as he hadn't eaten rice since arriving in this world. Luke listened attentively, his head bowed slightly, as if sharing his longing for the familiar taste of the past. At the city market, a young man decided he'd definitely go shopping for good ingredients the next day. Lively conversations filled the air, people haggled, laughed, and exchanged news, creating the feeling of a warm, vibrant city. Noticing the lack of rice, as he expected, Yuta used his skill to request the cat god to send some grains. Luke insistently suggested they take their time and have a snack first. Then Yuta, feeling his stomach growl, agreed and asked his companion to buy some meat kebabs from a nearby stand. Sitting on the bench, he devoured the hot pieces of meat with relish, while the dog next to him looked expectantly at his owner, clearly hinting that he wanted a helping too. Yuta laughed, broke off a bit, and handed it to him, saying he didn't mind sharing. When the boy heard Luke ask, with a serious expression, if he was the gourmet Luke himself, Luke blinked in surprise and replied that food cooked by a dog was still tastier. At these words, the wolf raised his head solemnly, as if confirming the truth. At this point, Noel asked to make another dragon steak, and Yuta agreed without hesitation. He offered to take the necessary ingredients directly from his magic bag, praising its convenience and capacity. While the meat was frying, the guy looked at the huge, menacing-looking dog with a smile, wondering how such a frightening creature could be so funny and cute at the same time. Soon, a cheerful girl named Chimeri approached them and happily introduced herself. Taichi, watching her, wondered if he was her familiar, then introduced his faithful companion, Luke. The girl greeted them both with a smile, eliciting a contented purr from the beast. Chimera timidly asked if she could pet the dog. Luke generously granted her permission, but the wolf himself unexpectedly recoiled, unwilling to yield to his affection. Luke then mockingly thought that his companion apparently preferred the attentions of beautiful she-wolves to human hands. The girl asked if that meant refusal, and Taichi awkwardly confirmed that it seemed so. Chimera merely smiled softly, noting that familiars can sometimes have a temper, and easily abandoned the attempt. Then the boy suggested they stop by Fluffy's cafe, telling her about the berry bunnies and mentioning that Luke wasn't too fond of being petted. The girl repeated the name with interest, and soon they were standing outside a lovely house with a blooming garden. Meanwhile, the wolf rolled blissfully onto his back, stretching contentedly. He proudly declared that the new item was perfect for the legendary Fenrir, as comfort is also a sign of strength. The snow-white dog noticed that the pillow had become even more comfortable than before and settled down on it with pleasure. He thought contentedly that it seemed to have adapted to his body, like a worthy throne for a noble beast. However, the other wolf soon became wary and warned them not to approach. His companion, on the contrary, was surprised that these creatures even dared to approach so close without feeling fear. The two little animals trembled before the huge wolf, but he calmly told them not to be afraid and to be careful during the game. His voice was confident and even gentle, making it clear he wasn't angry, but simply concerned about discipline. Fenrir woke up from a short nap and yawned widely, but suddenly realized his pillow was gone. He sat up, looking around in confusion, and frowned, wondering where such a valuable thing could have gone. Once on his feet, the lonely Fenrir felt a sense of unease. Someone powerful had stolen the orb from his pillow. He became wary, sensing a strange presence in the air, though he couldn't quite place it. The huge dog realized Taichi was gone and instantly suspected the enemy had come specifically for him. Without hesitation, he took off and raced out of the house toward the forest, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. After a while, Yuta met Luke and, smiling, asked if he was awake. He calmly explained that he'd washed the pillow and it was currently drying. The wolf looked at him in confusion, but gradually relaxed. Yuta stood by a line of clean clothes and said that things should rejoice in their cleanliness. The dog watched him thoughtfully, and the fabric swayed softly in the wind, shimmering in the sun, as if confirming his words. Yuta cheerfully explained that he'd washed the pillow because of crumbs from his snack. Meanwhile, a girl was sleeping peacefully under the blanket nearby, and the wolf's ears perked up, realizing that she, not his master, was the culprit of the mess. Luke admitted with a lazy sigh that he'd allowed himself to relax around Taichi, considering him his master as well. He added that the man was too weak to pose a threat, so he saw no reason to be wary. Then the boy, with a slight smile, promised to wake Luke early in the future and apologized for disturbing him. The wolf looked at the outstretched hand in surprise, hesitant to respond, but a hint of friendliness flickered in his gaze. Yuta couldn't resist hugging Luke, admiring the way his tails wagged so charmingly. The wolf grumbled, demanding to be let go, but Yuta laughed, persuading him to hold on a little longer for the sake of fluffiness science. Later, Luke happily thanked Fenrir for the magnificent fur coat, remarking on its softness. The great beast allowed himself a condescending purr, allowing him to pet him a little. After all, the washed bed was worth the reward. When Yuta returned home, he was greeted by joyful squeals and flapping paws. The little creatures were jumping around Taichi in jubilation. Unsure of the reason for such wild excitement, he simply smiled in confusion, thinking he'd missed something important. Soon he settled down on the sofa, surrounded by animals and a huge wolf. An atmosphere of peace filled the room, and Yuta thought that for the first time in a long time, he felt truly happy living in this world. A girl watching the scene remarked admiringly on how friendly the berry bunnies were. A nearby boy quietly complained that Luke could use some of that cuteness, while the wolf lay swaggering in his lap. The girl excitedly counted the animals: 1, 2, 10 rabbits, and with Luke, there were 11 familiars. Taichi laughed, and she admiringly said that he was simply an incredible tamer. Then the guy asked if the store was already open, and admitted with a bit of awkwardness that he was afraid to disturb them. She smiled, explaining that few people like petting monsters, so all furry lovers are welcome. Hearing him justify not inviting her with a secret agenda, the girl laughed cheerfully, calling him funny. She confidently declared that despite her cute appearance, she was strong enough to stand up for herself. Taichi nodded approvingly, saying that as a mage and part-time adventurer, they complemented each other perfectly. When she unexpectedly invited him to breakfast, the boy admitted he hadn't eaten yet and suggested something simple. The girl happily accepted and stayed to play with the berry bunnies while he got busy cooking. Yuta, mentally reviewing the ingredients, made a shopping list: pasta, meat sauce, salads, and Italian dressing. He decided to use his creation skill on the dishes and test how they would look in Fluffy's cafe. While cooking, he cheerfully explained the steps: boil the pasta, heat the sauce, and arrange the salad on a beautiful plate. When finished, Yuta smiled and apologized for the wait, serving the fragrant dish. Afterwards, the boy awkwardly apologized for using magic on the animals, but Lucia just laughed as she played with them. She said she couldn't resist, they were so soft and adorable that her hands just kept reaching out to them. Noelle eagerly accepted the plate of pasta, and Yuta warned her to eat it while it was hot. She asked what kind of sauce it was and, after trying it, exclaimed that it tasted simply amazing. The girl complimented Taichi on his cooking skills, noting the firmness of the pasta and the richness of the sauce. He laughed, admitting he'd used his favorite packet sauce and was glad she liked it. Eliza thoughtfully suggested adding a new dish to the menu, admiring the lovely presentation. Meanwhile, Lucia fed the fluffy creatures crumbs until the man gently asked her not to spoil them, promising to bring a separate treat. Yuta gazed tenderly at the small creature with sparkling eyes, thinking how unfairly cute these creatures could be. His smile softened, as if from the warmth emanating from them. Lucia asked if the babies ate strawberries, and Yuta confirmed it. She began to set out the food, but suddenly let out a scream. The fluffies, sensing the meal, began swirling around her, turning the kitchen into a merry chaos. The girl delightedly declared that she would never tire of looking at these charming creatures. The little animals, jumping happily, devoured ripe strawberries from the plate, making contented sounds as if thanking her for the treat. Yuta watched with a smile as the pink-haired girl confessed her utter fascination with the fluffy berry bunnies. He nodded, agreeing with her admiration, as even he, seeing them every day, couldn't get used to their cuteness. Thinking back, he thought of the cat cafes he'd visited several times, and how he'd linger after work just to see his beloved pets and treat them with treats. It filled him with a sense of quiet pride and satisfaction. Yuta warmly expressed his joy at finding another person who could appreciate the charm of fluffy creatures. The girl thanked him for his hospitality and promised to visit next time, while the little animals slumbered sweetly on the pillows nearby. When she asked how much the lunch cost, the guy smiled and replied that her kind words and impressions were the best payment possible. The girl confidently declared that she would always come to the rescue if trouble occurred, calling herself a strong adventurer. Yuta gratefully promised to call on her if needed, and they said a warm farewell, exchanging friendly words. Left alone, he thoughtfully suggested adding pasta with meat sauce to the menu as a complete set. The idea seemed promising. After all, there was no need to invent a new dish, it was enough to improve on an old recipe. Yuta cheerfully admitted that despite all his efforts, customers were still few and far between. He decided to replenish his supplies so he'd always be ready to cook something delicious when guests finally arrived. Luke, noticing a rumble in Fenrir's stomach, chuckled, and Fenrir asked for dragon steak. Luke merely shrugged, saying it was only natural. It was impossible to resist when the smell of freshly cooked pasta wafted through the kitchen. Holding the steaming dish, Yuta wondered if Luke thought he was paying too much attention to Chimeri. Smiling apologetically, he hurried to prepare the promised steak from the remaining dragon meat to rectify the situation. A week had passed since the cafe's opening. Yuta warmly greeted the cheerful merchant who ordered tea and pasta. The customer noted that adventurers and travelers, having heard of the unusual place, were increasingly frequenting the place. A cheerful young man entered the room and exclaimed how nice someone was, while another watched from the sidelines with a kind smile. A third approached and casually greeted them, remarking on how cozy and well-kept the room looked. The young man sat awkwardly, surrounded by the little creatures, unsure why they had gathered around him. Another man approached with a tray and remarked that it was rare to see all the furry creatures together, which surprised both of them. Noel, hemmed in by the rabbits, exclaimed that he felt like he was on the verge of a holy revelation. His companion, trying to contain his laughter, calmly suggested he rest in peace as the fluffies settled ever closer around him. The girl curiously asked what was hidden in the young man's breast pocket, and he awkwardly took out a few test cookies, admitting that he wanted to test a new recipe, but did not expect such interest. At that moment, Yuta and his assistant cried out in surprise. A flock of small avian creatures flew into the hall from the ceiling. They filled the room with joyful chirping, causing mild panic and laughter among the patrons. Yuta sternly reprimanded one of the guests for bringing his own food in trying to feed the animals. The visitor blushed and began to defend himself, claiming he had done so out of habit and not out of any desire to break the rules. When offered a taste of the cookies himself, Yuta hesitated a little and cautiously took a piece. He almost laughed as the animal's soft, pink-padded paws brushed against his hands, causing a tingling sensation. Noel found himself in the center of a furry storm again. Several little creatures had jumped onto his shoulders. Yuta was surprised to see that they seemed genuinely hungry, as they had previously had to forage for their own food in the wild. After that, he decided to prepare special treats, sweet snacks for the rabbits and meaty ones for Luke. A girl standing nearby watched nervously as the animals pounced on the food, leaving not a crumb. On a day when the cafe was closed, Luke was lying peacefully on the couch, enjoying the peace. Suddenly, a voice called his name from the next room, and Yuta asked if he had any suggestions for improving the living conditions for himself and the berry bunnies. The wolf nodded solemnly, praising his commitment to perfection, but emphasized that proper nutrition and a comfortable environment were the most important. After these words, he stretched out on a soft ottoman, and the boy, observing this scene, could hardly contain his awe at his majestic, fluffy appearance. Yuta then wondered if the rabbits needed more exercise outdoors. However, seeing them happily hopping around the floor, he decided they were doing just fine indoors, as their short ears twitched cheerfully with each jump. Luke advised his master to run around the yard himself, but added that the best exercise for a true warrior is hunting. Meanwhile, another wolf grinned as he imagined Luke riding the giant Fenrir, admitting there was something truly noble about his appearance. Yuta promised to train regularly from now on, and his furry companion immediately decided to take a nap before classes. The boy chuckled and, looking at the sleeping wolf, wondered what he should do. Perhaps he should cook something tasty. He soon decided to make strawberry and carrot treats, but remembered he was short of moonflowers and eggs. He then decided to stop by the Tamers Guild to inquire about a rare ingredient and find out where he could get it. Mira called out to him on the street. She'd noticed Tai Chi and asked with a smile if he was with someone today. She then admitted she'd been worried, as he hadn't been to Fluffy Cafe in a while, and she was curious about what he'd been up to. The girl enthusiastically began to talk about the recently tamed monsters, while the boy, leaning back on the bench, listened in amazement. Luke, standing nearby, growled disapprovingly, making it clear he didn't approve of talk of some little animals near him, the noble Fenrir. Then Tai Chi asked about moonflowers, and Mira showed him a picture of the plant in the book, explaining that it only blooms at midnight when the moon shines over the city. The guy skeptically noted that without street lights it would be hardly possible to sell them at night, but Mira confidently confirmed that such night traders do exist. She added that the moonflower shop was only a 5-minute walk away, which greatly surprised Tai Chi. He wondered if they actually used these ingredients, as neither cafes nor tamers typically use them. Mira admitted she'd like to prepare a treat for her familiars and guessed Tai Chi was also planning to use flowers in his cooking. A girl next to them jokingly remarked that she was even a little jealous of his cooking talent. Thanking Shelty for her advice, Yuta headed toward the magic shop. The girl wished him a good day, and he, stepping outside, muttered thoughtfully about where to look for that very place everyone was talking about so mysteriously. A few minutes later, he stopped in front of a huge building, decorated with carvings and symbols. Yuta was surprised that it was actually a shop, as he'd assumed such places were reserved for the nobility. Luke stood nearby, examining the entrance with interest. Slightly hesitant, the boy quietly suggested that they might not let him and Luke in. However, the wolf snorted and declared that his master should wait outside, causing the dog, standing nearby, to become alarmed, unsure who was now responsible for whom. Soon they were greeted by a cheerful girl, who cheerfully called out to Himari and asked why he had stopped by the magic shop. Yuta began explaining the purpose of his visit, and she listened attentively, nodding and smiling. He offered to wait outside with Luke so as not to disturb him, but she firmly refused. Reminding him that he had recently treated her to something at a cafe, she insisted on helping him herself, which made him feel slightly awkward. Noel, who was standing nearby, nodded approvingly and said with confidence that everything was under control, inviting the wolf to rely on him completely. Before leaving, Yuta asked Luke to wait and promised to bring him a bigger pillow as a reward. The wolf perked his ears warily and, slightly embarrassed, wondered if he was really being left alone with a woman. In the end, the boy decided to wait outside, and the dog assured him with dignity that the noble Luke wouldn't let him down. A silent understanding developed between them. Both knew that trust was more important than any orders here. Noel promised to return in a couple of minutes and was told not to rush. Soon he entered a bustling shop, where shelves groaned with colorful bottles and customers flitted from display case to display case. His curiosity piqued, but he reminded himself not to get distracted. Luke and Chimeri were waiting for him outside. He carefully examined the moonflower and the magical herb, studying their value and culinary uses. Considering the prices quite reasonable, he decided to buy a small amount and wondered how many cookies a single flower would yield. A little later, the guy apologized for the delay and asked if Chimeri was okay. She cheerfully replied that everything was fine, because Luke was a real ace, adding with a confident smile that he must be underestimating her abilities. Yuta decided it was time to return home and start preparing the treats. The girl curiously asked if he could watch, and he agreed, preparing the ingredients to test how many cookies one moonflower would make. When the guy inquired about the specific sweets they were planning, Lucia, with a mysterious smile, said it was a surprise worth waiting for. Meanwhile, Mira was delightedly examining a multitude of fresh paw-shaped cookies. Yuta suggested carefully laying out the finished products on the table so they could be counted, and the girl happily supported the idea while he began counting. He explained that they would make about 70 bags, each worth 40 to 50 people, and added that some of the cookies should be given to the berry bunnies for inspection. Mira animatedly insisted that she wanted to hand them the treats personally. Suddenly, Yuta noticed the girl eating a cookie and indignantly asked why. She sheepishly admitted that she couldn't resist, as it looked too delicious. The girl smiled happily, savoring the taste, and the guy tried to convince her he was going to try it himself. At that moment, several furry little animals ran up to his feet with interest, wagging their tails. A sweet aroma wafted through the air, and Yuta remarked that it smelled simply magnificent. The cheerful girl laughed, saying that it seemed like everyone around was ready for a tasting. One of the customers offered Luke a cookie, but he turned away haughtily without touching it. Then Yuta remembered with annoyance that he'd forgotten to make a special batch just for him, hoping there might be at least one left. Smiling, he decided to give in and allowed her to eat only those cookies, explaining that he wanted to know what his charges ate. The girl was surprised and asked what he meant when he called the animals his subordinates. He wondered if Luke was shy around others, like Chimeri, who had lived alone for so long. Afterward, Yuta suggested entrusting the berry rabbits to his care, and Chimera happily agreed. Yuta explained that the cookies were made with carrots, strawberries, and moonflowers. The girl thoughtfully asked if he should add a little meat to the dough to enhance the flavor, but he wasn't sure if that would be suitable for rabbits. When Luke finally tried the treat, Yuta was relieved to find he liked it. The wolf yawned contentedly, declaring it tasted quite good, and the boy realized that Fenrir's praise was worth a lot. Inspired by the new treat, the wolf asked for more, but Yuta sternly warned him that overeating could make him sick. He haughtily replied that the noble Fenrir knew no limits and tried to snatch another cookie right from her hand, while the girl laughed and called the children to the table. The joyful girl lovingly fed the fluffy animals, feeling happy. She whispered how wonderful they were and laughed, watching them carefully hold the cookies in their paws. Mira, surrounded by the little animals with strawberries in their paws, gently told them not to worry, there was enough for everyone. However, a boy standing nearby noticed with surprise that it looked like there weren't any cookies left. Later, Yuta and Eliza sat on the floor, surrounded by tiny creatures that resembled bunnies. Luke lay lazily nearby, and the boy wrote down a new dish on the menu, bunny cookies, priced at 300 rubles. One of the customers pointed out a menu update, and the cafe owner smiled and confirmed he'd found a great idea. At that moment, a girl peeked out from behind him, watching the scene with mild surprise and interest. Yuta enthusiastically presented the new treats, offering them as a substitute for any food brought from outside. One of the girls politely declined, another smiled and suggested they try them anyway, and the third, remaining calm, declared that black tea was enough for her. The armored warrior confidently remarked that the drinks here were always excellent. The woman next to him, smiling softly, added that despite his words, she always came with him. After all, their day would be incomplete without this visit. Noel warned the knight to be careful, as the enemy would attack with full force. He merely grinned, feigning confidence, but a moment later he was surrounded by a flock of small, furry creatures, greedily demanding treats, and all his bravado instantly melted away. The girl, watching the scene, teased Grizz, saying it was probably the first and last time he'd received such attention. He protested, claiming it wasn't true, while the knight nearby calmly began feeding the animals one by one, musing aloud on how complicated this cafe was. A few days later, Yuta warmly greeted Alls as she entered the cafe alone. She explained that she simply wanted to have a quiet cup of tea, without fuss or conversation. The girl with long ponytails ordered her usual set black tea and chocolate, and the barista noted that there were no customers today, so they could both enjoy the silence. Eliza thanked him for waiting, carefully placed the cup on the table and, taking a sip, thoughtfully savored the soft taste of the drink, holding an elegant chocolate treat in her other hand. Yuta apologized, a little sheepishly, explaining that he was buying the tea through a friend with connections to the suppliers. The girl admired the amazing aroma and curiously asked what country it came from. The boy tenderly praised the little creature, who snuggled into his palm. The girl thanked him for his concern and quietly apologized for any inconvenience, to which he gently replied that everything was fine. The girl with the tails awkwardly said she'd only come to read, but the little animal named Shoko seemed to understand her words and rubbed itself comfortingly against her hand. Then, smiling, she compared it to chocolate and wondered if they were even alike in color. Yuta invited her to take her time and enjoy her time, to which she responded with a confident smile, confirming that she would do just that. He watched her with a slight warmth, feeling a sense of calm from the scene. Sitting on the sofa, the girl felt a slight tension, wondering if anyone noticed that she was a little uncomfortable with the attention of those around her. The girl held the furry creature in her lap, suddenly realizing what the word mafu meant. When someone gently petted the animal, it licked her finger, causing her to laugh and ask not to do it because it tickled. She thoughtfully decided that next time she would buy cookies shaped like paws, and the guy standing next to her complained that all rabbits were gluttons and wondered if one of them had smelled the chocolate from his hands. Realizing his mistake, he muttered quietly that he must have let it slip out loud and tried to catch himself as the wolf suddenly lunged forward with furious speed. The boy blushed, feeling embarrassed by his own carelessness. He held on tighter as Luke ran at full speed, someone behind him reminding him that promises were meant to be kept. The wolf looked incredibly pleased, and the boy didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The boy riding Fenrir declared that it was impossible to slow down, jokingly adding that the dragon ahead looked delicious. Suddenly, the dragon itself roared that it wanted steak again, causing Yuta to nearly fall out of the saddle in surprise. A gigantic winged monster emerged from the clouds, and everyone around froze. Luke roared joyfully, declaring he wanted to fight, but someone quickly objected that the dragon looked too tasty to kill. One of the warriors shouted to Taichi that he was going to deal with the dragon himself, asking him to wait. Sitting next to the enormous wolf, Taichi nodded hesitantly, deciding it was best not to interfere. The monster flapped its wings, unleashing a blinding blade of energy called Moon Wind Slash. One observer muttered incredulously that the name sounded too pretentious, but a moment later, the entire space was illuminated by a flash. The boy admitted he'd been distracted by the move's catchy name and hadn't expected it to be so powerful. Then the wolf-like creature suddenly raised its ears and asked him angrily what he just said, as if questioning his courage. Taichi felt sweat trickle down his back. Luke's strength was truly astounding. He realized how lucky he was to have this Fenrir as his first companion in the new world, as without him, he would hardly have survived. Having collected his thoughts, the boy smiled and told his furry partner to hurry up and cook the dragon steak, promising to cook it for as long as he wanted. The wolf, pleased with the praise, growled contentedly and began preparing for the meal. While eating, Luke became thoughtful and asked if humans could even eat dragon meat. His companion, continuing to chew, recalled hearing about it as a high-class delicacy and suggested it was fine, especially if it was cooked to perfection. Taichi enthusiastically tried a piece and exclaimed that the taste was simply divine. A nearby dog purred contentedly, asking for more praise for being the one who procured this luxurious meal. Later, the boy told Luke that he was much stronger than he thought and thanked him for becoming his first partner in this world. He noted that the wolf now lived nearby and helped out at the cafe, transforming from a fearsome beast into a reliable friend. Then Yuta, turning to the large fox, explained that he hadn't taken the pillow because of him, but simply because it was soft. The fox watched him silently, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if assessing his impudence. Soon, a tired girl, unsteady on her feet, walked into Cafe Fluffy. She asked for a cookie and hot black tea, and the barista noted with concern how exhausted she was. The boy offered to bring her a blanket, as there were no visitors anyway, and allowed her to rest. The girl soon fell asleep right at the table, and the little animals, sensing her kindness, settled down next to her to keep her warm. Waking up in a soft bed, the girl momentarily lost track of where she was. Yuta stood next to her with a kind smile, noting that she'd woken up more peacefully than expected, with the bunny berries dozing peacefully around her. Noel thanked him for the chance to sleep and asked how much time had passed. Yuta replied that it had been about 2 hours, offering him fresh tea, but she quickly said she couldn't stay. Then Eliza brought a plate of chocolates as a compliment from the establishment and thanked them for their visit. The girl left in a hurry, and someone remarked that she seemed to be going through a difficult time. A little later, a caped knight entered the cafe and asked if it was closed. The owner greeted him warmly, saying there was half an hour left until the end of the working day, and he happily announced he wanted to play with the berry bunnies. Noelle, rushing about her business, thanked them again for the chocolate and promised to return when she had time. The staff watched her go, quietly commenting on how busy her schedule must be. Another knight came in shortly after her and asked the same question. Yuta again replied pleasantly that the cafe was still open, and the visitor, smiling, said he'd have time to play with the furry pets for a while after ordering his usual set. The barista asked if anything had happened at the Adventurers Guild. The armored woman replied that she had recently seen a tired mage, while a waitress nearby quietly eavesdropped on the conversation. The knight explained that nearby, deep in the forest, there were ancient ruins where, according to rumors, a 3-meter-tall Cerberus had recently been seen. One of the guests became wary, feeling uneasy at the mention of such a creature. Yuta then explained that Luke was Fenrir, and Cerberus's appearance was no surprise. However, the other two visitors vigorously objected, claiming that Cerberus was a catastrophic-level monster that even elite forces couldn't handle. The boy frowned, realizing the ruins were outside the city walls and wondering how dangerous such a creature could be. The girl responded by telling the legend of Cerberus, who once destroyed a city with a single sneeze. Yuta asked to keep this information secret, adding that so far there has been no activity in the ruins, and this is perhaps the only thing that gives them a little peace of mind. The group discussed how the Adventurers Guild was deliberately concealing information to prevent panic among the townspeople. Everyone recalled how exhausted Chimeri had looked upon her return, and one of the participants admitted he couldn't even imagine how to defeat the monster whose presence they had sensed. Two men were discussing the guild's gathering of a strike force of high-ranking adventurers. One sighed with relief, while the other noted that his wounds were still raw. Meanwhile, the girl, lying on the ground, looked wearily out the window and noted that it was already dark. The woman offered to host a dinner, adding that it was thanks to the brave adventurers that they were able to live in peace. The man happily agreed, saying he wouldn't refuse a hot meal, and the others thanked her for her thoughtfulness. After the meal, the boy cheerfully called the little animals, determined not to waste Taichi-san's gift. A girl nearby joyfully announced that she was going to pet them all, and, unable to resist, she already hugged one. She threw the ball, and the furry creature deftly caught it, returning it. She warmly praised the pet, calling him clever, and he purred contentedly, snuggling into her hand. The cheerful knight proudly showed Nina the small animal nestled in his lap. The girl smiled, noting how strange it was to see such a stern man so attached to a tiny creature. After a while, Yuta, wearing an apron, joyfully announced that dinner was served. The menu listed dragon steak, corn potage, salad, and fresh, soft bread. The knight and Luke immediately turned their heads toward the delicious aroma. One of the guests gazed admiringly at the rich dishes, marveling at their thickness and aroma. The girl reassuringly assured him that everything was prepared perfectly, and a man standing nearby watched with a smile as the little animal tried the delicacy for the first time, enthusiastically declaring it simply magnificent. Yuta thanked him for the food and cut into a juicy, steaming steak. After tasting a piece, he thoughtfully asked what kind of meat the dish was made from, quietly laughing at the question. The girls enthusiastically praised the tender meat and soft bread, and the armored man admitted he hadn't eaten with such pleasure in a long time. Yuta, listening to their words, smiled. It was enough for him to know that the guests were well fed and satisfied. After dinner, one of the men asked if the people had left, and Luke confirmed it. Then the boy suggested they stretch a bit, despite the warning about Cerberus nearby, assuring them he could handle it without any problem. He confidently declared that everything would be fine, since Cerberus was just a beast that could be tamed. The girl next to him frowned, noting that overconfidence often led to disaster. Yuta straddled Luke, feeling slightly nervous, and said he sensed a presence nearby. He wondered if it was dangerous, and whether the mysterious creature would be able to sense his own strength. At the edge of the forest, he spotted adventurers around a campfire, keeping a watchful eye on the dark part of the forest. Then the boy realized that this was precisely the threat he had been told about before, and his heart sank unpleasantly. He tried to suggest they give the camp a wide berth, but Luke snorted and declared it was time to show off his brilliance. With that, the wolf bolted, and Yuta yelled at him to stop immediately. Deep in the forest, amidst the cold fog, a three-headed monster emerged from the darkness. Its breath scorched the air, and each head growled in unison, creating a terrifying roar. Yuta froze in horror as he looked at the three-headed beast, and realized that this opponent was more terrible than any dragon he had ever faced. The adventurers, panicked, spotted their exhausted comrades and rushed to their aid. One shouted that they needed to report to the guild immediately, while the others were already engaged in a furious battle against the three-headed Cerberus. The snow-white wolf shouted not to overestimate their strength as they attacked the darkness before them. The dark beast roared in response and struck back with its claws, unleashing a technique called moonclaws. Luke watched the fight with trepidation, wondering if this Cerberus was stronger than the dragon. A wry thought flashed through his mind: if they won, they'd have to cook him into a steak again, like last time. Suddenly, a three-headed, furry beast appeared before them, causing everyone to recoil. One of the people present, in disbelief, remarked on how soft and charming it looked, muttering the word tamed with undisguised delight. The young man quickly apologized to the wolf for his sudden movement, but it sternly ordered him not to interfere. At that very moment, a multi-headed creature burst out of the fog, and the young man retreated in horror as the wolf cubs joyfully called to him, begging him to catch them. A few seconds later, Yuta realized that something incredible had happened. He had actually tamed two tiny, contented creatures, who were now happily clinging to his clothes, shaking their fluffy tails. Taichi could barely contain his smile as he held the soft little creatures in his arms. They happily rubbed against him and asked his name in unison, overjoyed to be no longer alone. The boy introduced himself as Taichi and, looking at the three-headed babies, decided to name them, from left to right, Noel, Pino, and Chloro. The creatures responded by wagging their tails cheerfully, repeating their new names, as if proud of them. Yuta admiringly praised one of the fluffy kittens for its miniature size and softness, and the kitten, purring contentedly, as if it understood the meaning of the words and with an important air allowed itself to be petted, causing the boy childish delight. He explained that the children were strong enough to shapeshift, but that this form made it easier for them to stay close. Afterward, Yuta activated his healing ability, sealing their minor wounds with glowing warmth. While the boy was still holding the animals, his companion anxiously said that they needed to leave. People were starting to come to their senses. Then Yuta realized he'd completely forgotten about the adventurers guarding him. He woke up in the morning and turned over to see three-headed babies sleeping on his bed. He watched them for a while, remembering how he'd brought them home the day before. Lying among these soft creatures, Yuta wondered why Cerberus ended up at the ruins, and was quietly glad that now every morning he began with such fluffy chaos. Taichi gently stroked one of the heads, thinking how hard it must have been to live alone. The creature opened its eyes and purred soothingly, saying that its touch was pleasant even after sleep. Yuta noticed that only one head was awake, and learned from Noel that they shared the same body, but had different consciousnesses. The other two heads slept peacefully, snoring lightly. The boy asked Noel if he was sure he wanted to come with them, and when he heard his answer, he smiled. He explained that they had to hide from people, and the ruins became their last refuge. The cat explained that people often attack them, mistaking them for monsters, even though they meant no harm. Yuta understood their pain and silently thanked Taichi for not passing by. Meanwhile, some recalled stories of kind people like Taichi and regretted not having met them earlier. Now, having met Cerberus, he felt hope for the first time. Yuta smiled warmly, saying he'd take care of breakfast and that the others could sleep in. Deep down, he promised himself he'd protect them, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a knight explained that they had been alerted and had been working since early morning. A smiling man greeted them, saying he thought they would sleep all day. Noel joked that the early gathering reminded him of his old job at the company, then offered to feed everyone for free. This elicited cheers and lively applause. One man happily declared that a new family meant more food, another delightedly noted the addition of furry pets, and three watched as three adorable three-headed puppies joyfully barked and pranced around the room. Everyone finally noticed that the dog really did have 3 heads. One of those present recalled that this was exactly the Cerberus they were looking for, and another quietly added that such creatures were incredibly rare, as if fate itself had brought them here. Guild reports mentioned that Cerberus had disappeared from the ruins after a fight with a massive wolf-like beast. It was assumed he had died, but one of the women cautiously noted that perhaps he was simply protecting his cub. She suggested that the creature had sacrificed itself for the child, and that would explain everything. The others eagerly agreed with her guess, and then began to talk about how Taichi, without realizing it, had tamed the Cerberus puppy simply by passing by. At this time, Yuta was kneeling in the middle of the room, surrounded by furry creatures. Mira noted with surprise that Taichi was a complete mystery. He had too many familiars, and each one seemed to be drawn to him. 2 women and a man were discussing a tamed 3-headed monster. One of them confidently declared that it posed no threat, as it was under control, and the others, albeit hesitantly, agreed that arguing was pointless. Yuta called everyone to the table and handed out plates of food to the knight and the woman. They thanked him and noted that they had finished discussing matters related to their work, admitting that the topic had been too sensitive. He and Lucia fed the lively animals, watching them happily devour apples. Yuta found himself thinking that despite the number of new residents at Café Fluffy, the atmosphere remained surprisingly calm and warm. The girl thoughtfully asked where that Cerberus had disappeared to, whether he'd been wounded and fled, or whether he'd died. The boy replied that there was hardly any need to worry, since she'd decided to go out and see them herself. Eliza suggested returning to the guild, and her companion agreed, promising to take a detour while she went ahead. 2 ogre-like creatures sat under a tree, lazily munching on something. One of them suddenly perked up when a girl with white hair and a cloak passed nearby, muttering that the day had been disgusting. She wearily said that the only thing that could lift her spirits was to feed the berry bunnies at Café Fluffy. The 2 enormous horned companions exchanged silent glances but didn't object, nodding respectfully. Later, the girl raised her staff and cast a powerful spell, a whirlwind capable of tearing apart the air. She claimed that her opponent had simply been unlucky enough to encounter her, and the wind had lifted several monsters into the sky. Noel, watching the tornado from afar, sighed wearily, noting that these monsters weren't nearly as cute as the berry bunnies. Then she turned and decided to return to the city. A young man met her at the door, greeting her and asking if she was too tired to come. The house greeted them with comfort and quiet light. The girl cheerfully replied that she had already finished all her chores and had simply come to enjoy the company of the rabbits. A small dog nearby barked loudly, watching the fluffy little creatures hopping happily across the floor. When Noel turned around, Yuta smiled and introduced the 3 new family members, Pino, Cloro, and Noel, hoping they would all become friends. The girl froze for a moment in surprise. In a cafe, one visitor ordered hot black tea, another thoughtfully recalled the story of a 3-headed monster named Cerberus, while a third quietly sighed, looking into her cup. Noel, hearing familiar names and seeing the fluffy babies, realized with irritation that the very Cerberus she had been looking for in the depths of the forest had been right in Café Fluffy all this time. Coming closer, she reached out and, touching their soft fur, couldn't contain her delight. The warmth and velvety fluffiness made her eyes sparkle with joy. The girl remembered hearing legends about monsters that could change size after being tamed, but this was the first time she had seen it with her own eyes, and she was genuinely surprised. Yuta walked down the street next to Luke and the three big-headed beasts, feeling proud. Noel watched them go, wondering who this Taichi really was, since only the most talented tamers could subdue a monster of catastrophic rank. Yuta handed a cup of tea to the seated girl, who thanked him with a slight smile. At that moment, she quietly decided that, if necessary, she would use her authority as guildmaster to discreetly support Café Fluffy. On the day of the Mafu Café's closing, a young man lay in bed, surrounded by his furry companions, feeling happy from their affection. When the animals reminded him of breakfast, he laughed and agreed to prepare their favorite treat immediately. While he was cooking, Yuta wondered how much time had passed since he came to this world. He admitted to himself that there was still a lot he didn't understand, while Luke lazily stretched and pondered what to do today. Taichi entered the hall, where he was warmly greeted by a girl. She wondered why, despite having so many familiars, he knew so little about the craft of taming. The boy sheepishly replied that he came from a distant province where such matters were almost unheard of. Yuta picked up the heavy book handed to him. Unfolding it, he realized it was an encyclopedia of the monsters inhabiting the surrounding area, and he began leafing through the pages with interest. The young man read aloud about creatures that prefer certain habitats and those that can adapt anywhere. Images of various animals floated in his imagination, seeming to come to life between the lines. He was talking about the different types of wolf-like monsters, and the girl remarked that he especially liked the furry ones. Yuta laughed, agreeing that their fur was indeed pleasant to the touch, but suddenly froze, astonished by something he read next. A cat adorned with flowers appeared in the illustration, and the girl exclaimed, recognizing a wildcat. She explained that such creatures were found far away in the dense forests of a neighboring kingdom. Yuta wondered how long the journey would take if he went there, and decided that riding Luke would be faster. However, his companion replied that the journey by cart would take at least a month. He thanked her for the map and beamed, saying he'd thought of everything. She teased him for his overenthusiasm, but Yuta merely chuckled and hurried to Luke to discuss plans. Running up to the wolf, he called its name. The wolf raised its head in displeasure, grumbling that it had been woken for nothing. Then Yuta announced that he was going to the neighboring kingdom. He explained that he was talking about the kingdom of Azerin and that a legendary forest cat lived there, which he dreamed of taming. The little creatures began to chatter happily, overjoyed at the opportunity to make new friends. Luke proudly declared that with his noble Fenrir strength, the journey would take only a few days. Someone nearby admiringly remarked that he was truly magnificent, despite his merciless handling of the horses. Yuta enthusiastically expressed his joy at Luke's agreement to go on the trip. The huge wolf offered to ride him if he insisted, and the other cubs unanimously demanded to be taken along. Luke muttered discontentedly that he would only talk to Taichi, while the furry kids argued among themselves about who would ride on his back, complaining that it would be too lonely at home without him. Before leaving, Yuta assigned Pino, Claro, and Noel to look after the berry bunnies. He explained that he trusted only them, as they were the most responsible of the family. The boy carefully held the three-headed furry creature, which had nearly torn off its tail while playing. He scolded it with a smile for its carelessness and promised to visit them as often as possible. Yuta wondered if the Cerberuses could manage the housekeeping and cooking without him, and came up with the idea of hiring a temporary assistant. The animals agreed to guard the house, proudly taking on this mission. Eliza explained that there were no strict hiring rules. You could contact the guild for an intermediary or search for someone yourself. Yuta thanked her for the advice and nodded appreciatively. He suggested posting a recruitment notice right at the entrance to Café Fluffy, since there were already regulars there. A girl walked by at that moment, happily waved at Taichi, and said a warm hello. The girl enthusiastically offered to work temporarily in the cafe, and Taichi was surprised and explained that he was just about to look for an assistant through the trade guild. The girl hesitantly noted that perhaps she would not be suitable, since Chimeri was still a child, but the guy doubted whether it really mattered. She confidently replied that at her age it was quite possible to run the establishment on her own, but the man doubted whether she could keep up the pace, because even Luke, the main source of anxiety, required constant attention. The cheerful girl enthusiastically agreed to explain the details and asked if her interlocutor had a little time. The scene shifted to a quiet rural setting, where a cozy house with a blooming garden stood. The kind man greeted her with the words "Welcome home," and she wondered if she would feel the same joy as an employee. Meanwhile, he told her he was going to adopt a new furry friend and would return in about 25 days. Yuta happily explained that their new companion would be a wildcat from a neighboring country. Mira was surprised by how fluffy he looked, to which he replied with a smile that was precisely why he had chosen him as his target. He confirmed the temporary contract was for 25 days, adding that he'd left plenty of time in his schedule. Lucia excitedly shared that she dreamed of playing with the wildcats once they'd tamed one. Noel confidently stated that he would leave as soon as Chimera got the hang of the job, and asked what day would be most convenient to start. As a freelance adventurer, he was ready to start at any time. The other character thanked him for his reliability. Yuta offered to continue working until Chimera completed her training, but the girl insisted on discussing pay first. She offered 1,000 per hour and 10,000 for a full day. The guy agreed, explaining that he would give 1,000 shell for the care of his familiars, and the girl happily accepted the conditions, promising to take care of each one, because she loves all the fluffies without exception. The next day, the man greeted the girl warmly, wishing her luck on her first day at work. She beamed and said she was happy to work among such lovely creatures, and he handed her an apron with the cafe's logo. The girl happily announced that she had become part of the team and would do her best. Yuta introduced her as a new employee and promised to show her what they do, and she enthusiastically agreed. Noel explained that the morning always begins with checking the familiar's health, and then demonstrated how to pet or hold them to gauge their well-being. The girl listened with keen interest, nodding. Yuta invited everyone to follow him to wash the animals, and Lucia noticed that the monsters rarely weakened, as they were naturally resilient. She examined one and confirmed that it was completely healthy. Yuta explained that he bathes his pets once a month or when their fur gets dirty, and showed them the yard where they can run and play freely. He explained that the bathhouse was accessible with towels and toiletries, then opened the door and revealed the bathing area. The girl noted with admiration that even familiars had a bathtub, which required considerable effort. The guy explained that all he had to do was turn the tap and hot water would flow. The girl, surprised, asked if it really wasn't well water, but heated water. Noel added that he had used a special technique from his country, but was unable to improve the system without rare materials. The girl listened to him with surprise, and Luke examined the device and approvingly declared that everything had been done correctly. Yuta praised Luke for his independence in entering the bathhouse without assistance, adding that the other familiars could do the same. He then invited everyone else to join him in the bath. While joyfully soaping his hands, Yuta declared that maintaining cleanliness was their sacred duty, and he happily promised to do everything to make the process a joyful experience for all participants. Mira was surprised to see her fur become smooth and sticky after the bath. Yuta gently reassured her, explaining that after drying, everything would be as fluffy and soft as before. He suggested using a little magic to dry the animals faster. Together with Lucia, they carefully dried the large dog, while the smaller creatures swarmed around, sparkling and joyfully reacting to the warmth of the spell. Noel demonstrated his skill by draining several animals with a single flick of his wrist. Everyone gasped in admiration, and he cheerfully offered to teach the girl how to work in a cafe, causing her to smile shyly. Yuta watched as Mira fed some of the fluffies, and when she happily showed him the bowl, he thanked her and announced that they would now be the ones to watch the house while he was gone. The little creatures unanimously promised to handle everything and entertain the customers. Yuta, looking at them, remembered how he had once been to a cat cafe and was now delighted to have created something similar. The boy gently stroked Luke's head, promising to bring him back a ton of souvenirs from the neighboring country. The wolf snorted in response and impatiently demanded they get going. Yuta stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the animals, smiling sheepishly when the wolf noticed his sloppy appearance. He only laughed, admitting that perhaps he really was a little out of shape. He warmly said that he loved all his pets, and, gathering his courage, agreed to leave before dawn to get to the city faster, a little worried that they would attract too much attention. Yuta promised to protect Luke from any danger, admitting he was weaker but no less determined. The wolf looked at him calmly and nodded, preparing for the upcoming journey alongside him. The little animals chattered joyfully about how cozy and warm it was here, far from the wild. Yuta, looking at them, thought his pets were too cute and good-natured, and he wanted to join in their merry frolicking. One little animal cheerfully rolled the ball to another, and the big dog noticed that the berry bunnies also loved to play. The little one happily confirmed that playing was the most fun thing in the world. 3 furry creatures invited everyone to play, but one of them warned them to hold back their strength so as not to destroy the house. The others laughed and promised to be careful. Several small animals excitedly chased the balloon, and 3 fox-like creatures leaped nimbly into the air to catch it. A dog, lying off to the side, opened his eyes in surprise as the balloon flew toward him. Everyone decided to have a competition and began the game. Luke hit the ball hard, setting the pace for the fun match, and the room immediately erupted in excited barks and squeals. Yuta enthusiastically praised the kittens when one of them deftly caught the ball out of the air. He smiled as he watched the fluffy creatures demonstrate their agility and energy. Luke confidently declared that he could do the same and threw the ball with all his might. The wolf, wasting no time, twisted sharply in his jump, demonstrating perfect reflexes. Luke suddenly yelped as the ball flew past him and hit him in the back. Someone sternly remarked that he should play more carefully in the house, and the dog looked away guiltily. Yuta ran up and asked if Grizz was hurt after getting hit in the face with a ball. He laughed and said he was fine, but the animals had already surrounded him, excitedly demanding that they continue playing and asking how things were going at the cafe. Lucia brought a gift, a rare Remo fruit, grown on hunting grounds. Yuta was surprised, thanked her, and said it was a very touching gesture. Yuta gazed admiringly at the brightly colored fruit and invited everyone to try it. The little creatures cried out joyfully that the fruit was incredibly delicious and smelled simply wonderful. Yuta tasted the prepared dish with a smile and admitted he could eat it forever. Around him, the little animals happily devoured the delicacies, their faces shining with pleasure and the warmth of the moment. A girl with long hair gently stroked a small creature, and a man in armor, watching the berry rabbits, said the sight was soul-healing. A girl in shorts excitedly declared that she wanted to try it too. The 3 furry creatures invited the wolf to eat with them, praising the treat. At first, he dismissed them haughtily, but upon hearing that the dish had been brought by his subordinate, he reluctantly agreed and began to eat with restraint. Everyone gathered around the 3-headed beast, enjoying their meal. One of the patrons enthusiastically declared that he loved Cafe Mafumofu, and the others laughed, sharing in the joy and comfort of the moment. At dawn, the boy admired the mountains illuminated by the first rays of the sun. A nearby dog asked him what had so impressed him, and Yuta, smiling, replied that these mountains were truly beautiful. Arima Taichi, once an ordinary office worker, recalled sleepless nights spent cramming papers, realizing how little time had passed since he found himself in a new world. A scene came to mind of him saving a cat from a car on the way home, and then happily sharing his dream of visiting a cat cafe at least once a month after a hard day at work. Now he communicated with the furry creatures with a smile, thinking about how the god of cats gave him a second chance, a new life full of comfort, warmth, and meaning. He recounted how he hadn't been able to open a cat cafe in the previous world, but realized his dream here by creating Mafumofu Cafe. Thanks to the skills bestowed upon him by the deity, the business flourished, and customers became regulars. Holding the map, Yuta estimated the distance to the kingdom of Azurin, where a wildcat was rumored to live. He dreamed of taming it and making it part of the Cafe Mafumofu team. Luke offered to give him a piggyback ride to get to the next town by morning. Yuta thanked him and admitted he didn't like sleeping outdoors. As soon as he settled in, he thought Luke might be rough, but there was a kindness about him. Hugging the fluffy cat close, he wondered what awaited them next and resolutely moved forward. Luke was racing at breakneck speed, and the boy could barely hold on, squinting against the headwind. He asked him to slow down, but the wolf, laughing, remarked that a warrior should get used to speed. The young man, delighted by the view, suggested a short break. The wolf agreed, lazily reminding him that he was counting on a delicious dinner as a thank you for the ride. That night, Yuta admired the stars while sitting next to a huge wolf. The wolf grumpily suggested they hurry for food, and the boy proudly explained that his magic bag could preserve food over time without spoiling. He added animatedly that now that the dragon meat supply had run out, they would prepare a dish from the 7-colored bird that Luke had recently shot. While talking to the fox-like creature, Yuta explained that they were short of ingredients. The creature offered to get everything they needed from the supplies they had purchased earlier. Noel demonstrated his cooking skills using the monster cooking ability, explaining that with the right ingredients, he could create food even for magical creatures. Yuta, amazed by the speed with which the wolf devoured the portion, asked to savor the taste a little longer. The wolf grinned contentedly and said the dish was flawless, so there was no need to restrain his appetite. Yuta smiled and admitted that he was always happy to cook for his familiars, as they ate with such gusto. The wolf, his eyes closed contentedly, said there was truly no need to rush, his gaze gleaming with calm satisfaction. Yuta sat on the grass next to the snow-white wolf, savoring every bite of the prepared food. He felt his body fill with warmth and strength, thinking he could eat forever if not for his sense of proportion. The night scene showed the city's fortified gates, with several travelers and a large dog standing near them, awaiting inspection. This marked the border between the kingdoms of Shuluk and Azarin, where a new adventure was about to begin. The young man surveyed the bustling city with interest and noted that the atmosphere here was quite pleasant. He then suggested they first find the Tamers Guild, as not all establishments allowed familiars inside. The wolf slyly asked if he was looking at something, and the boy sheepishly admitted that he was simply admiring his luxurious fur, which shimmered in the moonlight. The tired boy collapsed face down on the bed, and the dog grinned at his master's apparent weakness. Then a girl standing nearby declared that she was a noble Fenrir and was glad the man hadn't noticed she'd been called a dog. Lying on his back, Yuta thought about how nice it would be to have more stamina so he could walk longer. At that moment, a surprised feline asked if he really loved forest cats so much. The young man passionately admitted that being surrounded by cats gives him strength even on the most difficult days. He said that just the thought of petting one keeps him going. Yuta remembered how he'd once participated in a battle called the Company, where he'd worked tirelessly. The fox asked curiously what kind of battle it was, and a nearby she-cat purred contentedly as someone gently stroked her neck. He was happily feeding several cats a treat called Nyakuzu, savoring the moment and feeling like he would remember this day forever. 2 nearby cats suddenly perked up, noticing movement on the floor. When someone called him cute, the boy quickly retorted that he wasn't, but immediately admitted that forest cats were truly adorable. The girl, smiling, agreed that there was no point in arguing. He said it was impossible to rank cuteness, because they were all equally dear to him. Then he noticed the wolf and, with a slight smile, called him by his name, Luke. Yuta laughed, noticing how even Fenrir's ears had turned red with embarrassment. In response, he muttered that his master was too weak and should get some sleep, as he had a long journey ahead of him tomorrow. The young man joked that sleeping so much was excessive, but the wolf stood his ground. Then Yuta wished him good night and added that he'd cook something delicious in the morning. The next morning, they were walking through a bustling market. The boy, looking around the stalls, asked a vendor if he had dragon meat. The vendor shook his head, explaining that such a delicacy had long since sold out. Yuta caught the aroma of rich minotaur tail soup and offered to try it. The wolf looked approvingly as the boy took 2 bowls and handed one to him. The boy ate with pleasure, noting the rich flavor, and the wolf devoured his portion with gusto. After the meal, Yuta said he'd get more meat next time and suggested they continue their walk. A young man stood outside next to a huge wolf-like beast. 2 guards, noticing them, exchanged glances and noted in amazement that they had never seen such a creature before. The boy praised his companion for his beautiful thick fur, and he was pleased to note that his owner showed great promise and was getting stronger every day. Yuta introduced himself as Taichi's tamer and proudly showed off his familiar, Luke, the Wolf King. Both guards bowed their heads respectfully, amazed by his skill. One of the men said that since the familiar was registered, they could pass without any problems. The wolf, however, asked curiously what the title King of Wolves meant, chuckling at Luke's apparent growth and respectability. Yuta thanked the knights for their kindness and, walking forward, felt a sense of excitement. The moment had finally come to meet those very forest cats in the kingdom of Azarin. Soon the quiet town of Fallen appeared, immersed in the greenery of the forest. Cozy houses with carved shutters stood among the tall trees, and animals rested peacefully beneath the canopies, as if guarding this corner of the world. The boy admired the wooden animal figurines decorating the facades. Each one was carved with such love that he couldn't help but smile. The wolf next to him asked, grinning, if he'd like something similar. Yuta cheerfully compared the local beast to Luke, but Luke immediately protested, declaring that he wasn't just a wolf, but a noble Fenrir. Hearing this, the elderly master curiously asked if the familiar held a grudge against its master, and the boy quickly apologized. The boy explained that he carved the figurine after seeing a wolf once, but his interlocutor corrected him, it was not an ordinary animal, but a powerful creature, and comparison with simple wolves was offensive. Yuta confirmed that he understood familiar speech, much to the old man's surprise. He asked if there were tamers who could speak with monsters, and the wolf nodded approvingly, acknowledging the rarity of such a gift. The boy noticed that Luke was angry at being equated with ordinary wolves. The old man admired the beast's thick fur and asked if the traveler had recently arrived in Fallen. Yuta replied that he had, adding that he was looking for a place to spend the night. The dark-haired man recommended an inn called Forest Cat's Rest, located a little further down the road on the right. Yuta found the name pleasant, though he was wary that they might not be welcomed with a familiar. At the shop, the boy learned that the inn was run by a beast tamer who allowed patrons to bring their own creatures. Feeling relieved, he thanked the merchant and headed there. The cozy, softly lit establishment turned out to be more of a cafe than a hotel. Yuta politely asked if he could share a room with his familiar, and the owner happily invited them both inside. The owner offered a spacious room and thanked them for their visit. A cat with bows and a small key around its neck stood nearby, and someone in the room gasped in surprise, noticing its rare coloring. The man explained that he ran the inn almost entirely by himself, with only occasional help from his younger sister. He mentioned that the forest cats were his familiars, to which the girl remarked that the place was more of a sanctuary than a simple cafe. Yuta instantly recognized the cat's breed and said he'd come specifically for them. The man sitting next to him was surprised, and someone else, standing next to a dog, exclaimed thanks to the cat god. The boy asked why these creatures didn't possess magic or power. The man replied that their charm wasn't in their power, but in their softness and comfort, petting one of the fluffy cats with a dreamy expression. A young tamer named Arts introduced himself and said he and Luke would be under Taichi's tutelage. He admitted he used to be an adventurer, but after his parents' death, he inherited the inn because he hadn't grown strong enough. He thoughtfully noted that forest cats only defeated weak monsters, which is why he was rarely accepted into adventurer teams. A nearby cat stretched, as if sharing his master's sadness. Arts explained that he was having trouble taming strong monsters, and the costs of maintaining familiars were mounting. He admitted that he was glad Taichi had arrived, as the inn's business was deteriorating. The guy was surprised to hear that the establishment was considered the best in the area. The owner, slightly embarrassed, said there was an embarrassing story behind it and asked him to let him know if he decided to stay. Yuta thought that in this world, people didn't value small creatures very much, but once they discovered their charm, no one could resist. He watched as the guests played with the furry pets with smiles. Inspired, he decided that if he allowed cats not only to help, but also to play with visitors, then this place could become incredibly popular and bring joy to everyone who crossed its threshold. Taichi enthusiastically suggested to Arts that they transform the inn into a place where guests could play and spend time with cats. Arts froze in surprise, not expecting such a proposal, and the girl standing nearby smiled and offered to show Taichi to his room. With shining eyes, Taichi declared that cats were the treasure of the universe. He described with admiration their soft fur, innocent eyes, and graceful, proportionate bodies, adorned with bows, as if created by nature itself for joy. Yuta, with a slight smile, described the unusual flowers that bloomed directly on the fur of wildcats, pointing to a shining creature nearby. Mira watched him in amazement, not believing she was seeing such a thing. He explained that although cats can be aloof, with just a little attention they become surprisingly affectionate. After that, the guy asked Yuta what her plans were next. Yuta thoughtfully noted that his cafe was gradually gaining popularity, but assured the wolf that it would be difficult for people to immediately like wildcats, no matter how charming they were. He used his creation skill to make a cat teaser toy and was delighted with the result. Deciding to ask Arts if he could play with the forest cats, he noticed that the dog nearby remained completely indifferent. Soon, Yuta entered the dining room with the dog, smelling the pleasant aroma of food. He took a deep breath and said with a smile that he was looking forward to dinner. Using his skill, Yuta once again created the perfect cat teaser and, overjoyed at his success, decided to make sure to ask Arts to let him play with the pets, while the wolf yawned lazily, showing not the slightest interest. Entering the dining room with the dog, Yuta noted the appetizing smell in the air and said that he felt his appetite growing with each passing second. Taichi jumped, noticing the cat sitting right on the table. The girl next to him asked in surprise what had happened, and he awkwardly asked if she'd understood correctly that the object in his hands was intended for communicating with wildcats. Yuta looked with admiration at the cute kitten, who meowed softly, and the girl confirmed with a smile that yes, that was exactly why. The young man felt a desperate thrill. He knew he had to endure the cat's embraces, because if they hated him, he wouldn't survive. At that moment, 3 fluffy cats wearing bows approached him. Yuta was nervously unsure if his toy would work, but one cat watched its movements with interest. He held his breath, wondering if it was having any effect. His doubts vanished when several cats joyfully jumped on the teaser. Yuta watched with delight, unable to believe he'd provoked such a storm of playfulness. 2 young men watched the cats play. One was amazed and remarked that he had never seen them so happy, while the other agreed, calling it a rare miracle. Yuta, his eyes shining, admitted that this was the first time his toy had worked so well, and warned that he might cry with happiness as the cats ran happily around him. Sitting on the floor in his room, Taichi admired the toy he'd created and called it a true revolution. He was fired up with the idea of making more balls, tunnels, and even movable suspensions. When someone remarked that he looked a little sloppy, Taichi was surprised, but smiled and asked if the other person really thought so. Felix happily promised to make more cat toys, and Yuta, laughing, offered to lend him the kitten for an immediate test. Meanwhile, the little creature slept peacefully on his lap. Yuta explained that forest cats must travel to the underworld from time to time. The girl noted with surprise that the path there was different for each of them, as such a journey was impossible inside the forest. Yuta explained that taming one wildcat meant establishing a bond with their entire clan. Stroking several purring pets at once, he imagined a winged feline deity blessing all furry creatures. Yuta noticed his companion's face was a little unkempt from fatigue after working so long on the toys. He nodded with a smile and said that being able to hear cats' thoughts helps him refine his inventions. Alone with his thoughts, Yuta wondered if Luke felt lonely, as Luke often called himself a lonely Fenrir. So he decided to do something special for him to lift his spirits. Soon he showed the dog a new flying disc, designed specifically for play. The wolf looked at it in surprise, and Yuta suggested they go outside, as they couldn't test it indoors. Observing Yuta's enthusiasm, someone remarked that it would be a shame not to try something made by his own hands, even though it looked too cute for such a serious creature. Luke showed the cat a jingling ball, hoping she'd like it. He then decided to make 2 more toys, a tunnel and a soft cube, while the kitten happily chased the ball. Yuta enthusiastically praised the toy and suggested they try the disc immediately. The dog reached for it with interest, displaying a rare display of excitement. He heard a distant sound and smiled, noting that it sounded like someone was already playing. The second character added that it was a pleasant change from the recent combat training, and he was glad everyone had some time to rest. Yuta announced he'd be stepping out with Luke for a bit, promising to be back for dinner. Meanwhile, the cat was enthusiastically rolling a ball, and someone nearby remarked that the customers would probably enjoy playing with it too. Yuta asked if he could borrow the ball, explaining he wanted to play for a bit. After being granted permission, he explained he'd made a tunnel and asked to place the ball within easy reach of everyone, to which he received permission to test the new device. One of the characters thanked Taichi for his kindness, despite their brief acquaintance. He warmly replied that he was happy to help and always welcomed new friends. Yuta impatiently urged his companion to try the flying disc, but he, slightly stunned, asked him not to rush, while a large dog stood nearby, watching what was happening with interest. The boy, beaming, asked how to use the disc properly, and the wolf skeptically asked if he was really that excited. The boy simply thought wistfully about how great it would be to play with all his familiars. He asked the dog to watch closely, then launched the frisbee with all his might. The wolf watched the flight and chuckled, saying the disc had flown about 70 meters, not a bad result. Yuta realized that no one in this world knew how to play frisbee, and he chuckled awkwardly as he watched Luke squint his eyes in confusion and slight aggression. He enthusiastically declared it was time to begin the game and, having convinced the wolf, invited him to join in. The wolf reluctantly agreed, confident that his master would still enjoy the undertaking. Suddenly the dog jumped and bit the ball right out of the boy's hands, causing him to lose his balance and fall, exclaiming that it was unfair. Yuta thought this challenge was too easy for Luke, who caught the disc out of the air with ease. Wolf proudly declared that such games came effortlessly to him. The boy tried to explain the rules of a game called Fetch to the dog. The goal is to catch the disc before it falls. Seeing that the dog didn't understand, he decided to change his approach slightly. He repeated the explanation to the now larger wolf, demonstrating with gestures how to catch the frisbee before it touched the ground, and added with a smile that it would be much more fun that way. Then Luke threw the frisbee with all his might, and the huge dog caught it out of the air with a flash of dexterity. Yuta watched in awe, wondering if he'd ever be able to catch up. Then one of the cats leaped toward the ground with the grace of a hunter, her gaze fixed on her moving target. Her lithe paws tensed, ready for another lunge, as if she anticipated victory. Meanwhile, the boy watched with a smile as the enormous wolf moved with incredible speed and strength. He soon jumped onto its back, feeling the power beneath him, and thought the beast was still holding back. Then Yuta praised Luke for making a perfect shot on his first attempt, mentally noting that behind his harsh exterior he concealed a rare kindness. Even his rude remarks sounded caring. After this, Luke proudly declared that such throws were a piece of cake for Fenrir, and encouraged his companion to throw the discus harder. He confidently took up his position, preparing for the next throw. The boy tossed the ball, and the dog caught it mid-flight, rolling easily to its paws. Then Yuta admitted the throw had been a poor one, and the dog chuckled lazily, implying that his owner could have tried harder. After a short pause, the boy explained that the throw itself was simple, but sending the disc far was much more difficult. He tried again, and the frisbee landed close, causing the wolf to flick its tail in irritation. He then suggested that Luke try throwing the disc himself, but Luke merely snorted, looking at him with the air of someone who considers such an undertaking a mere trifle. However, a slight spark of curiosity flickered in his gaze. Soon the disc rose into the air, and the boy noted in amazement that it must have flown more than 100 meters. The wolf calmly replied that it had been easier than expected, and the girl standing nearby remarked that Luke was unrivaled in his argument. After this, Yuta admitted with a nervous laugh that he was unlikely to be able to catch the disc back. The beast then confidently declared that it was now his master's turn to prove his skill. When the game ended, the boy leaned tiredly against the wall, catching his breath. A dog sat nearby, glistening in the sun, eliciting excited exclamations from passers-by and a desire to pet it. Meanwhile, Yuta became wary after hearing a strange noise in the distance. He was sure they were alone in the hall, but soon he saw Lucia and Mira happily playing with several cats near the tunnel. Afterwards, Taichi returned to the tavern and immediately felt a warm welcome. One of the assistants reported that the cat toys had become incredibly popular, and the animals now spend hours with them. Taichi then introduced his sister, Lucy, who smiled and explained that she combined her work as an adventurer and an innkeeper. Yuta thanked her for the toys she created, adding that they bring joy to everyone. Soon, the girl introduced her two companions, cheerful friends named Marilia and Bianca. Their friendliness instantly filled the room with an atmosphere of lightness. Both girls gazed admiringly at the wildcats, and one admitted she couldn't fight such cute creatures anymore. Then the boy next to her agreed that their charm was truly disarming. One of the cats climbed into the tunnel, purring contentedly. Watching this, Yuta thought the tavern should put more emphasis on comfort and pet play. That's what makes the place truly special. He later noted that allowing guests to wander freely around the rooms wasn't very sensible. He noted that the reception and dining rooms were on the ground floor, while the living corridors were above, creating a convenient zoning system. Then Yuta suggested building a cat tower and attaching planks to the walls so the cats could climb higher. He mentioned that it would be best not to use his magical skills, since Art himself had designed the building. In conclusion, he explained that cats love heights and feel more confident when they can observe from above. The girl happily agreed to help, adding that she usually leaves the work to her brother, but for the sake of the cats, she was willing to take on the job herself. The guy then suggested going outside and checking if they had enough suitable planks, asking if they had decided to do everything too hastily. The girl assured him there was no need to worry, as this was part of the tavern's new management policy and everything was under control. Afterwards, she admitted that they had fewer guests, so any changes would be beneficial. Hearing this, Yuta wondered if the adventurer's words sounded too unconvincing, but the determination in her voice made him believe it. Meanwhile, Yuta remembered that he'd inherited the inn from his parents and decided to honor Lucy's wishes for a change. Then, laughing, Lucy admitted she hadn't expected catnip to provoke such a strong reaction from the pets. She then explained that the tavern's original concept was for patrons to relax and play with cute cats. Thanking Taichi for his support, she offered to help nail the boards, but he politely declined, explaining that it was better to leave the job to her. Afterwards, Yuta smiled and said he was glad there were places where people could freely interact with magical creatures. He added that he dreamed of more such establishments, as they made the world a warmer place. The girl thanked Taichi for his help and promised to definitely visit his cafe when the tavern became popular again. He happily agreed, noting that he would be looking forward to seeing her. Soon they were shaking hands, while the dog and cat watched with interest. At that moment, Yuta thought that perhaps their circle of furry creature lovers would only grow, and this was the beginning of something bigger.